In the early morning hours of Friday, August 14th, 1987, police raided a sprawling compound surrounded by barbed wire and hidden deep in bushland, located near the lake resort community of Eildon in Victoria, Australia, roughly a 2-hour drive north of Melbourne. Children were taken, or rather rescued, from their childhood home, taken from the adults they had been raised to believe were their parents. What happened to those children was devastating. Their lifetime of trauma literally began at birth for many of them, where within seconds they were snatched from their biological mothers, then illegally transferred into the care of people whose perception of reality, justice, and ethics had been wildly distorted by a strange mashup of LSD, yoga, and blind devotion to a manipulative, delusional narcissist, Anne Hamilton-Byrne. A woman of small gaggle of followers that included several medical doctors and psychiatrists, lawyers, nurses, and academics, truly believed was the second coming of Jesus Christ, sent back to Earth to prepare the world for doomsday. Why was Anne claiming this? Did her family history of schizophrenia have anything to do with it? Did she truly believe she was Christ? Had the psychedelic soak culture of the 1960s and a bunch of newly in vogue New Age teachings distorted her worldview to the point where she actually thought that was possible? Or was she a charismatic opportunist, a cruel psychopath who knew exactly what she was doing all along, destroying families and hurting children to fulfill her selfish desires for wealth and some warped notion of what a perfect family should look like? Today, we'll uncover how Anne built her cult, one that has been described by many over the years as the most notorious cult in Australian history. Out of teaching yoga, targeting academics and psychiatrists to be her first followers, creating rituals aided by massive amounts of acid, fucking a random gardener to gather intel on her first big recruit, and so much more in today's Happy Holidays. Be glad you're not in this cult edition of Timesuck.
This is Michael McDonald, and you're listening to Timesuck.
You're listening to Timesuck.
Happy Monday. Welcome back to the Cult of the Curious. Let's get weird, you fucking weirdo. I'm Dan Cummins, Lord Suckington, King of Otter Island. A much smaller version of Beaver Island that a lot of people haven't heard about. Don't even worry about it or look it up. Royal fanfare trumpet aficionado. And you are listening to Timesuck. Hail Nimrod, hail Lucifina, praise be to good boy Bojangles, and glory be to our resident songbird. I know we haven't heard him sing for a while, but he's still around, Triple M. I have just one wonderful announcement, and then we will get into an episode just as what the fuck inducing as last week. Or at least close to that. Last week was exceptionally weird. Huge thank you to our amazing community for coming up big on the Bad Magic Giving Tree again this year to help a bunch of kids have a solid holiday. Kids who otherwise wouldn't. This year, with your help, we were able to get 91 kids what they wanted for their holiday gifts. Fan donation, and none of it was acid. We haven't dosed a single kid. Fan donations totaled $14,083.59 for a total of $29,553.51 in full support. We actually had a last-minute large donation come in that allowed us to help a family that really stood out. A single dad who's a veteran, 3 kids. The mom sadly died by suicide. And now they're going to have, a much better holiday than they otherwise would have. Hail Nimrod for helping meat sacks who are dealing with a lot of pain and stress at this time of year. Big thanks to St. Joan, my mother-in-law, who cries every time she talks to me about working on this project, for all of her wonderful efforts to coordinate with the parents and ensure that the kids, all their wish lists, were met to the best of our abilities. Additionally, we want to take a moment to thank all of you who have supported either this show, Scared to Death, or both, by listening, by rating and reviewing, by telling people about us, by subscribing on Patreon. We donated $163,000 in 2025 to various good charities throughout the year, added $14,320 to the scholarship fund, donated $1 billion to bad charities as well. No, I don't know why I said good charities earlier. Plus the Giving Tree funds bring it to a grand total of $177,342.74 in charitable giving. Our goal for 2025 was to hit $1 million total in lifetime donations and charitable giving, and we did that thanks to you. We take 20% of every monthly contribution we get on Patreon, donate it to a worthy cause. Now we're up to almost $1,060,000 in total donations, not including the scholarship fund. So this community is just simply the best. Hail Nimrod. And thanks again to everyone making this show a success, however you do it. We appreciate each and every one of you so much. And now it is 1:30 cult o'clock. We're fucking late. And I need to jump into another wild story right now. Anne Hamilton-Byrne was born Evelyn Grace Victoria Edwards, a poor child raised mainly in an Australian orphanage, who many years later transformed herself physically, psychologically, and spiritually into Anne, a multi-millionaire messiah with hundreds of rich, successful, and well-connected people under her spell. Seemingly intelligent people who became putty in her plotting, conniving hands, ready and willing to be molded into something new, into whatever Anne wanted them to be. We're going to cover her life from the very beginning today in the timeline, starting with years of childhood trauma, followed by better days as a yoga instructor. And then we'll examine how one British author in particular and professor became seduced, manipulated, played like a chess piece, like a fiddle, to aid Anne Hamilton-Byrne in creating one of the most infamous cults, if not the most infamous cult in Australian history. A cult that quickly evolved from a drug-fueled meditation group of sorts into a big grift that made Anne millions and tens of millions of dollars, enough to buy, wonderful properties all around the world, multiple countries, a cult which, despite so many warning signs, member escapes, media interest, evaded true detection and criminal investigation for decades. We'll dive into the dark and depraved ways and acquire children, dozens of them, and then raise them under strict abusive conditions to carry out her spiritual teachings. Once most of the world was destroyed in an apocalypse. We'll cover the abuse they endured and the LSD they were dosed with. Dark and fascinating stuff today, so on brand. Let's hop into our timeline and check it all out.
Strap on those boots, soldier. We're marching down a Timesuck timeline.
On December 30th, 1921, a massive earthquake cracked open the ground, creating a ravine so deep in a little Australian town that it connected the fourth level of hell with the Earth's surface for the first time in 666 centuries. Before local authorities were able to close the ravine, and literal portal to the underworld, a creepy little blonde baby demon girl crawled out. And she would be taken in and adopted by two fucking idiots, foolish enough to think they could somehow shower enough love and affection on this demon to turn it into a decent human being, and Beelzebub laughed at their arrogance, sharpened his pitchfork, and waited for her to grow up and become powerful enough to bring enough evil into the world to open the portal back up wide enough for all of hell to follow him up to the Earth's surface where he would reign as king. Or, on that same December day. That definitely did not happen. We would remember that. And instead, something much less dramatic did. Anne Hamilton was born Evelyn Grace Victoria Edwards in Sale. We don't have census data to know what Sale's population was back in the 1920s, but based on how much smaller the population of the entire state of Victoria was back then, we can estimate it was likely no more than 1,000 billion people. Right? I feel confident about that. Or less than 2,000 people, or maybe even much less than that. It was described in one source as a small rural town with one main street, a collection of farmland surrounding a tiny commercial district. It's an old town by Australian standards, founded in 1844, less than a decade after Melbourne. Sits just a few miles off of the coast, due east, 135 miles or 216 kilometers from downtown Melbourne. The town first began to really grow in the early 1850s thanks to a nearby gold rush. A railway line followed and further helped with growth. A building boom took place between 1855 and 1865, where many of the town's now historic brick buildings were built. Looks super cute. Feels pretty touristy, based on some walkthrough videos, some drone videos I watched on YouTube. Has an adorable little tree-lined main street with some old brick buildings, some slightly more recent Art Deco buildings, center parking, lots of quaint shops, and there's a bunch of wildlife around due to it sitting on a marshy floodplain. The Thompson River and Flooding Creek both skirt the town, as do a number of lakes, and the Latrobe River also nearly touches the town. All kinds of water. Great place, by the looks of it, to fish, enjoy water sports, and small town life. And I bet for a lot of kids, pretty idyllic place to grow up. But not for Evelyn. And I will continue to primarily refer to Anne as Evelyn for now until Anne's new identity emerges. Evelyn was the daughter of Ralph Vernon Edwards, an Australian man who, like many men at the time, had gone to Europe to fight in World War I. Upon completion of his duty, Ralph married Florence, an Englishwoman from Wandsworth in South London, and the two would not experience marital bliss. The not-so-happy couple quickly settled in Sale, where Ralph worked as an engine cleaner on the railways when he did work. There, despite not really seeming to care for one another, they did have 7 kids, and Evelyn was the eldest. And she would quickly take on the role of de facto mother to her younger siblings. Neither Ralph nor Florence were capable or willing to care for their brood with any consistency. Ralph frequently ditched his wife and kids for long stints of time, doing God knows what, probably drinking, sleeping around, enjoying a taste of the single childless life. And you know what? Who can blame him? Right? He figured it out. He got a great life hack. He figured out the cheat code, how to have his cake and eat it too, and who can be mad at that? He got to taste the comfort of having a wife and kids, but also could leave them whenever he wanted to actually have fun. He won. He fucking won life. No, he was a real shithead. On at least one occasion, he left to avoid debt collectors. Just left his wife to deal with them while she also had to raise their kids while having no money to raise those kids. Talk about shoveling some extra stress on your spouse. Eventually, he disappeared altogether and was classified as whereabouts unknown. Finally went out to grab some milk and smokes. Just thought some version of, you know what? Fuck my family. They're dragging me down. I'm sick of it. I'm out. How many times have we seen that come up in the backstories of both cult leaders and serial killers? Because her mother, Florence, could also not care for her or her siblings for a different reason. After her dad, Ralph, bounced, Evelyn and her siblings ended up in an orphanage. So why wasn't Mom able to effectively raise the kids either? Well, tragically, she was extremely mentally ill. Florence frequently heard voices, saw things that were not there. She thought for a while that she was a medium who could communicate with the dead at will. At some point in the 1920s, likely listening to the voices she kept hearing and following their advice, she set her hair on fire on a public street in Sale. Eventually, Florence would be officially diagnosed with schizophrenia, a condition marked by hallucinations, a distorted sense of reality. While experts still don't know the exact nature of schizophrenia, its exact causes, something to keep in mind in regards to the formation of the family cult is that it tends to run in families, meaning Florence's children, obviously including Evelyn, significantly more at risk of developing schizophrenia than people without the affliction in the family tree. Numerous twin and family studies in recent years have indicated that genetic factors can explain 60 to 80% of the risk for schizophrenia. According to 2 recent studies, one conducted in 2015, the other in 2019, environmental influences such as complications during childbirth, early life adversities, growing up in urban settings, and migrant status are thought to interact with genetic predispositions to affect the likelihood of developing schizophrenia. And Evelyn would definitely experience, plenty of early life adversities. Her mother, Florence, would spend over half her life committed to various asylums. And as she bounced from mental institution to mental institution, her unattended children were left to fend for themselves for long periods of time, scraping together what little money they had to feed themselves when they weren't taken from her care entirely. Off and on, starting at the age of just 5, Evelyn and presumably her siblings lived at Old Brighton Orphanage, a place that would be demolished in 1963 while attending Sunshine Primary School in the working-class suburbs of Melbourne. We don't know how bad her childhood was in this place. Later on, Evelyn, as Anne, would rewrite the real painful version of her childhood with an invented and fanciful one. In the later retelling, Anne's education was upgraded from Sunshine Primary, a state-run school, to Furbank Girls Grammar, a private Anglican day and boarding school, and her ramshackle childhood home became, quote, a grand mansion with massive grounds. Her unstable British mother was transformed into a fiery red-haired Scottish woman descended from French royalty, and her absent law-evading father became an inventor and a close friend of legendary war hero T.E. Lawrence, whose activities in the Middle East inspired the 1962 Oscar-winning film Lawrence of Arabia. Anne also said her entire family could astral project. They could travel out of their bodies and into the spirit world, so that's fun. And then when she was 3, she realized that, quote, Mummy was different and started seeing her not only as her mother, but also as her spiritual teacher. At 3. And that Mummy had her own teacher, a Tibetan guru who was instructing her in yoga. Okay. She said, there was no doubt about it. My mom was with a guru at the time. A lot of spiritual polishing had to be done. to gain the necessary and deeper understanding of this thing called yoga. Anne will later say that she met her mother's guru at the age of 14. Quote, "Some students follow the inner master who never shows himself on this plane," Mother said. And in the physical form, others will find a guru in the earthly body who spends a lot of time on all planes teaching their disciples how to leave the body and helping them if they become entangled in a morass of psychic difficulties. Totally. 100%. Florence's death certificate will give her religion as Church of England. So that other Eastern stuff probably didn't happen. There's no evidence outside of Anne's word to support claims that, she was meeting with a Tibetan guru on some other plane of existence. On brand for a cult leader. I actually can't think of a single one off the top of my head who has not rewritten their past to some degree. Not much is known about most of Evelyn's teenage years. There's a big gap in the records where her paper trail goes cold. Was she abused at Old Brighton? It's very possible. I found an article from January 2013 in the Bayside Local Review titled Institutional Child Abuse, Brighton's House of Horrors. The article tells the story of Amelia Smith, who endured years of abuse while living at Melbourne Orphanage in Brighton, including the forced adoption of her daughter, born in 1959, and that was what the orphanage changed names, I should say, over the years. Between 2008 and 2013, a number of prominent Australian politicians made big, sweeping apologies for the physical, psychological, and sexual abuse of literally hundreds of thousands of Australian children placed into state institutions in the early and mid-20th century. The problem was apparently extremely pervasive. There were no true watchdog organizations looking out for these kids, and when the kids did lodge complaints, they were routinely ignored. The abused children were just written off as liars for the most part. If she wasn't abused herself, at the very least, Evelyn knew that the complaints of kids in places like these were routinely ignored. She also knew, thanks to her mom, how one could be committed to an asylum, and she will use this knowledge years later to nefarious ends. In 1941, Evelyn Grace Victoria Edwards reemerges into the historical record at the age of 19, when she found herself one step closer to realizing a childhood dream of hers of having a big family. Evelyn had met a man, Lionel Harris, at a fruit market. She accidentally bumped into him right after he shoplifted a ripe honeydew melon. He carved a crude hole into it with his pocket knife and was just about to try and fuck it in the bathroom. Sorry. That was crude and unnecessary. I apologize. Those are two things I hate, as you know. No. She ran into him in the bathroom where he was screaming in pain because he had shoplifted a bottle gourd and shoved it up his ass so far that he couldn't get it out and was really hurting. He was panicking, but Evelyn was able to get it back out using just her teeth, and that's how he knew she was his one true love. No, what? No, that was exceptionally crude and unnecessary. Be gone, Lucifina. She just ran into him at the fruit market. That's all I know. I don't even think Bonsai Bob was there. Lionel was a young Royal Australian Air Force officer, and Evelyn and Lionel quickly fell in love, got married, and soon after had a baby they named Judith. The couple was thrilled, but their joy was to be short-lived. According to a blog written by Ben Shenton, a later victim of the family cult, he was in the cult as a child, Lionel was supposed to be stationed in Australia on military duty during World War II, but then he went AWOL. He went missing for months and months. Finally, military police tracked Lionel down, found him hiding out with Evelyn at the couple's home back in Victoria, Australia. According to another source, the Cult of the Family docuseries, 2 years after Judith was born, and I'm assuming after the aforementioned arrest, Lionel applied to leave the Air Force, out of grave concern over his wife's mental health. Doctor's records showed Evelyn had been diagnosed with depression, postpartum depression perhaps, likely had been neglecting her daughter, Judith. Lionel feared that Evelyn had inherited her mother's mental instability, and maybe she had. He was eventually discharged from his military duties on compassionate grounds and took up work as a car salesman to support his young family. Perhaps this was an early indication of Anne's ability to be manipulative to get what she wanted, exert influence over those around her, or perhaps she was genuinely unwell in this case, and Lionel was simply a devoted husband. The family of three, Lionel, Evelyn, and Judith, would not remain a trio for much longer. That's because Anne and Lionel were preparing to become a family of four, only not through conception. Rather, they had started the process of trying to adopt a baby boy from Barnardo Homes, a children's charity, which sent kids from the UK to Australia for adoption. Makes sense. I mean, if you're a young mother and very likely struggling with serious mental illness, I mean, the best thing you can do is to adopt a baby. It's a great call. Everyone knows that bringing another child into an unstable home is the very best way to make sure everyone involved is super happy. It's not clear, actually, why they chose the adoption route. The couple was quickly approved, and soon their baby boy was waiting for them down in Sydney. But then in early 1955, disaster struck. Lionel was literally driving to Sydney to pick up their son when two cars collided at an intersection and caused a pileup. January 10th, 1955, he was about 3 hours drive away in Bathurst, New South Wales, when his car got caught right in the middle of this carnage, and Lionel Harris died in the wreckage at the young age of 33. Now, by then, Lionel and Evelyn had been married for 13 years, and Evelyn was devastated to lose her husband. Her family of three, instead of becoming a family of four, had become a family of two, and that was how it would remain, at least for the next decade plus. Unlike most cult leaders, Evelyn did not jump into the cult game until a little bit later in life. She wasn't deeply religious in the years leading up to it either. Wasn't in another cult, figuring out how it operates, how to incorporate what works into her toolkit. She was busy being a single parent for quite a while. And in the 1950s, single parenthood was pretty scandalous, even for a widow. Society definitely looked down its nose at unwed mothers, and the law echoed such prejudice. Single mothers were considered unfit to provide a suitable environment for children, and many unwed pregnant women were strongly encouraged, aka coerced, to give up their babies for adoption, a practice we'll look into a little later in the timeline. Naturally, this also meant that single women were not allowed to adopt, which meant that Lionel's sudden death didn't just rob Evelyn of a husband, it took away her chance of a much longed-for second child unless she wanted to remarry. She'd been so close to bringing that baby boy home, like hours away, and the rug had been pulled out from underneath her in the most cruel, painful way. The double blow was rightfully devastating, and Evelyn's reaction to it was fucking weird. Whether to gain sympathy or avoid pity, or maybe this was some mental illness manifesting, Evelyn spun the tragedy into a fanciful spy saga, and she would tell people that her husband had been murdered by a Russian secret agent because her husband was a secret agent working on behalf of Australia. What is big deal? I harass her husband to death. It's fine. It happened. We'll move on. We jerk soft shame cock and corner. We move on. You never know when Chikatilo might still appear, that Russian monster, all these years later. Maybe Chikatilo murdered her husband. This may have been her first foray into telling a big lie about her past and gaining a lot of sympathy and intrigue when she did. And that, had to have felt good. And I imagine she probably started to tell other lies. I am, kind of speculating here. Maybe sometimes getting caught, other times being amazed by what strangers would accept. I wonder if she tested out all sorts of lies with people, building up her ability to reimagined, how the world saw her, just based on what happens later. Evelyn, riddled with grief and left alone to raise her young daughter in a cramped, humble Melbourne flat, did for sure begin to reinvent herself. She became obsessed with plastic surgery now, built a glamorous new identity. You can find pictures of her as a young woman in her early 20s, and then as a woman in her early 40s, and doesn't look like the same person at all. Like, she really changed her appearance. So then in the late 1950s, backing up a bit, around the age of 36 or 37, Evelyn becomes Anne. And she didn't just change her first name. Evelyn Grace Victoria Harris became Anne Hamilton. It's a weird move, right? Just to shift your identity like this, just completely change your name. Part of this big identity shift was Anne getting really, really into yoga. There was uncertainty about the exact date yoga arrived down under, but it's generally accepted that yoga reached the Australian shores in either 1949 or 1950. The timing coincides with Michael Volin, a white Russian yogi who had been teaching yoga in Shanghai, China, and emigrating to Australia after the Communist Party took over China. Side note, I put the words Michael Volin Yogi into YouTube to try and find out how to correctly say his last name. The first two videos that came up were titled Yoga is Demonic and Yoga is an Open Door to Demons. I had no idea there was so much demonic speculation around yoga. What a world. I never stopped being terrified by just the volume of magical thinking and stupidity just going on in this world. And just real quick, because it's very entertaining, before moving forward, since many of you have been asking for the return of this segment, let's look at some of the comments underneath these demonic yoga videos in today's Idiots of the Internet.
Idiots of the Internet.
Both these videos are shorts. This first is posted by the Lionheart Church YouTube channel based in Georgia. And I strongly believe that lead pastor Otha, who will be speaking here, is 100% full of shit. This is craziness. The description of this video, simply, yoga is an open door to demons.
Divine cast a demon out of a woman. And so I just hijacked him for a moment and asked him some questions. And I asked him, I said, is yoga bad? 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 He said, of course it's bad, especially the crane pose.
What?
There's plenty of other forms of exercise for you to focus on that. Just stretch. You know what I'm saying? That's all you just stretch. That's all you gotta do. What is it about that one thing that's forbidden? You gotta do that one thing, even though there are 90 other things that you can do.
What? I had no idea that this was a thing. That this was a concern that a lot of people have. In case you missed it, this real pastor who feels to me more like a Saturday Night Live fucking caricature than an actual human being is claiming that he helped someone named Devin exorcise a demon from some woman's body, and then he either talked to Devin or he talked to the demon afterwards. I think Devin, but it's not entirely clear to me. And Devin or the demon told him that yoga is very, very bad. It's very, very demonic, especially the crane pose. So going to the comments on this video, first comment is, yeah, I like it. It just says, he's serious with the laughing emoji. Like, what are you doing, dude? Then user Michael Harden, 4383 comments, how about doing crane pose while meditating high on the devil's lettuce? Is that a straight pass to hell? Probably. It probably is. Empress Pizarro comments, there's plenty worse things than yoga, like men projecting and pretending know at all. God put me in isolation to keep me from getting contaminated. Smiley face emoji. I think Empress Pizarro is simultaneously saying that this is ridiculous to be worried about yoga being demonic while also, not seeming mentally stable themselves. Sprocket99 posts, maybe if you're a weak soul and you connect to the ether and get attached to, but I don't believe yoga is actually, all caps, evil. Okay? Most of those words were misspelled, by the way. And then Me Need Money replies to Sprocket99 with, you don't believe in God or know about God. You are new age at best, I can tell. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks for chiming in. George Phillips 55 posts a confusing take on all this. Is this guy for real? I have died for, all caps, minutes, more than once. Back to lowercase. If anyone had deacons, it was me. And there's lots of within all this. And then stop listening to people tell you, quote, no. And all caps, quote, you are bad. Read the Bible, Read everything, Now help others. Don't, quote, hurt demons, Help people. George, I want you to get some help. I want you to take some remedial classes at, local library or community college. Just work on your communication skills. And I want you to get it and start, seeing a therapist. Yeah, I feel like you have a lot of shit going on. My favorite comment was left by God the Human, who wrote, you know what else is bad? Lying. Because you made that shit up. And you and me both know it. Fair. And now I just want you to hear a bit more of the other video that popped up right away. The one described as yoga is demonic. Oh my God. I don't know who the guest is in this short video. It doesn't say in the caption. Posted by Michael Knowles, who has a lot of followers, a disturbing amount. I'm not a fan. Here's a bit of what this guest has to say.
I'm just going to come right out and say it's because yoga is the practice that invokes the most demons. So when you're practicing yoga constantly, you are entirely demonized. And so not only is your flesh kind of at enmity with the truth of what yoga is, but the demons are too. They don't like to hear that.
Yoga.
Oh my God. Oh my God. This little short has almost 5,000 comments alone, just so many views. When you're practicing yoga constantly, you're entirely demonized. She said, that's an interesting take. I don't want to spend more time, away from our our topic. So I'll just share one comment from the nearly, 5,000 on this video, most of whom agree with her, by the way. And there are so many other videos like this. Tavang3953 posted, "That is why Asians practice Tai Chi." Fuck, what? Because fucking yoga is demonic? You think that a lot of people in Asia practice Tai Chi, which I guess is heavenly? I can't. I can't with these people. Maybe the coming apocalypse, and we'll start to preach about, soon here in this episode. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we do need an apocalypse. Maybe the world needs to be cleansed of so many terrifying idiots of the internet.
Idiots of the internet.
Hopefully that was an entertaining deviation. And you know what? Anne will become pretty evil. And she will teach a lot of yoga that will coincide with her descent into evilness. You know what? So maybe they're onto something. I mean, they're definitely not. But it's a funny connection. Michael Volin, by the way, back to him, a.k.a. Swami Karmananda, started Australia's first yoga school, the Sydney Yoga Centre, around 1950, and is recognized as the nation's first yoga teacher as we know it today. Then just a few years later, 1953, Swiss national Margrit Segesman was studying yoga in India and the mountains of Tibet, supposedly. Everybody likes to talk about being in the fucking mountains of Tibet with this shit. When she received an instruction from her guru, Michael, to go teach yoga to the West, which took her to Melbourne, where she also began teaching, of course. Nothing weird, about being sent around the world by your guru at all. Both Michael Volland and Margaret Segesman's yoga schools became very popular. By the mid-1950s, women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, women like Anne in Australia, were the demographic who seemed the most fascinated by this shiny new thing called yoga. It was seen as glamorous and hip and a little bit taboo. It drew suspicion. Athletic and spiritual, yoga promised a workout and also a doorway into a new kind of spiritual well-being that was not part of Western religion and therefore seen by some as satanic. Just like those YouTubers said, right? Yoga pants, tight, revealing yoga pants worn by fit, health-conscious, bendy women. That is how Satan gets you. Get out of here, Lucifina! Anne, of course, is one of these women. And soon it seems after she began taking classes, she started to think that she could lead these classes. She was ready to go full yoga, full evil. She wanted more access to her fellow evil students to gain influence over them. So early on, she decided that she wanted to start teaching yoga. Teaching would, of course, give her direct access to a large number of the wealthy, bored middle-aged women. In 1960, when Anne is 38, Margrit Segesman opened the Gita School of Yoga, which merged endocrinology, the science of hormones and glands, with the yogi teachings of Tibetan gurus, or something like that. Maybe it merged a bunch of silly, nonsensical bullshit with a bunch more silly, nonsensical bullshit. As a top female yoga instructor in Australia, Margrit had the kind of influence that Anne craved. And one day on a windy, rainy day in Melbourne, Anne saw her opportunity to get a few private moments with Margrit. Margaret was pulling down some awnings outside of her yoga school, and she needed some help. Anne, primed and ready to seize an opportunity, stepped in, introduced herself as a physiotherapist and nurse. Maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. The two women connected, and Anne soon began working alongside Margaret, training to become a yoga teacher. Not long after that meeting, Anne started to teach yoga classes at Margaret's yoga school, but not exactly the way that she had been taught. Anne was viewed as a fantastic teacher, and students flocked to her classes, but very quickly, her classes started to change, and they became very unconventional. They became increasingly spiritual, maybe even occult-like. For example, one day, a young male yogi taking Anne's class disagreed with her, and Anne cast a spell on him. At least she thought she did. She went to the kitchen when they were cleaning up, a former cult member would later say, and she muttered, "He's not going to be here tomorrow. He's going to be very sick." The next day, the man was sick, and she thought her spell worked. Or it was a coincidence. Either way, she starts to think she can cast spells now. And this is the final straw for Margit. It's her name is spelled a little weird. I don't know if it's Margaret or Margit. I think it's Margit. Margit, who now asked Anne to leave the yoga school. Sounds like the right call. And Anne did leave, but she was not done with her devil yoga. Anne gathered the connections she had made at the Gita school and opened her own yoga studio in Toorak, an exclusive suburb in Melbourne that was and apparently still is synonymous with wealth and privilege. One of the most exclusive and desirable communities in all of Australia. outside of a large number of apartments, aka flats. It reminds me of Beverly Hills, just kind of poking around on the internet. Turak was the kind of place where affluent middle-aged housewives sought a form of liberation that did not involve tapping out of their privilege, gallivanting around Asia, or giving up the materialistic joys of life. Many of these women felt stuck and deeply unfulfilled. Many were going through midlife crises. Their children had grown up. Their husbands were out having affairs with younger women, and there was nothing they could do about it. In those days, divorce was a much bigger deal, was much harder to follow through with than it is now. It was incredibly shameful and carried a much larger social stigma. These women, feeling trapped, sought solace in someone like Anne, who told them that middle age was the perfect time to begin their real journeys. Just like back at the Gita school, Anne's yoga classes did not focus on just yoga for very long. Her classes quickly morphed into a bizarre blend of exercise, teachings on Hinduism, Buddhist mysticism, and Christian beliefs, with elements of the occult like consulting astrologers and even holding seances with Ouija boards sprinkled in. All sounds a bit schizophrenic. Women, some of whom would end up in her cult in a few years, came to Anne seeking inner peace, and she used their interest in yoga and Eastern mysticism to lure them into something else, a new belief of hers that was rapidly evolving as she continued to develop it. In those early days, Anne drew inspiration for her teachings primarily from the Siddhartha and the Bhagavad Gita. The story of Siddhartha is the story of Siddhartha Gautama, aka the Buddha, an Indian prince born into a life of luxury, but when he eventually sees that real life is filled with suffering, he renounces his privileged existence to become a wandering man and an enlightened being. The second text, the Bhagavad Gita, is a 700-verse Hindu scripture considered the most sacred in Hinduism, and it presents a dialogue from roughly 5,000 years ago between the warrior Arjuna and his charioteer Krishna, who is an avatar of the god Vishnu. In the text, Krishna tells Arjuna to uphold dharma in the world, which in simple terms means choosing the path filled with duty, righteousness, and morality. And in the 1960s, dharma seemed to be in short supply. The fear of nuclear annihilation following the Cuban Missile Crisis was very real, felt all around the world. A general malaise hung in the air, gave way to more esoteric thinking. Women especially were questioning mankind's appetite for destruction. Men dominated nuclear debates, while women drove a great deal of the nuclear disarmament movement, sharply criticizing the patriarchal expectation to be a man, which translated to demonstrating an unfailing readiness to fight for one's country. Men were being seen by many as being inherently destructive, and women were seen by many as being inherently nurturing. And many women felt it was their gender's responsibility to protect the children and future generations. This mentality worked out in Anne's favor. She leaned on the mood of the era and on the emerging popularity of various ancient religious texts to plant the seeds of a more fulfilled life in these women. Suburban housewives didn't have much clout in those days, but that didn't matter to Anne, because as she grew her yoga following and built her reputation as an in-demand yoga teacher turned New Age guru for wealthy women desperate for spiritual guidance, she was actually planting the earliest seeds of something much bigger to come. Anne was still dreaming of a big family, but her notion of a family was starting to take a different shape. No longer biological, no longer traditional in any way, starting to look a lot more like a cult. Her family would be her followers. Anne, of course, knew that the women she was teaching yoga to were not really her family, not yet. They could leave her at any time, and that scared her. To make them a true part of her family, she decided she needed to destroy their existing families, cut the ties that bound them to their traditional lives. Cult, cult, cult. Anne knew that if she could get them to leave their husbands, their families would disown them because divorce was still the scarlet letter back then. And that would be perfect. They'd have no one but her and others devoted to her to turn to. And thus, she could have control of these women for life. So the big question now was, how the hell could she convince women to turn their backs on everything they had ever known and proverbially, or even literally, follow her out into the wilderness? By convincing them that she was no normal human, that she wasn't just a guru, she wasn't just a prophet even, she was a god. She was literally Jesus Christ returned. Damn that yoga demon! That yoga demon really got into her. To make this crazy plan work, Anne needed to find her first true, incredibly devoted follower, someone who was respected, reputable, someone who would become her recruiter, who could give her claims credibility. And so that was how Anne came to zero in on, not a woman, but a man, Dr. Raynor Johnson, a highly respected British physicist and author, to take on this role. Love that we have a Dr. Johnson in this tale. We don't have a Richard, So Dr. Johnson will have to do. Let's meet this son of a bitch. Without him, Anne never becomes a cult leader and is relegated to yoga guru. Johnson had been born in Leeds, England in 1901. He was discovered to be academically gifted at a very young age, a child genius. Graduated first-class honor student from Oxford University, where he studied nuclear physics. Pretty fucking smart dude. 1922, Rayner received his PhD in physics from the University of London. Also married a fellow scientist, Mary, who would receive a Master of Science from the University of London, and they would have 2 daughters. Also, while slaving away on his PhD program, Rayner became interested in parapsychology, study of shit like telepathy, ghosts, psychic powers that fell outside the realm of normal science. He became connected with the famous Society for Psychical Research in London. And not gonna lie, I kind of love that. Anyone listening who also listens to Scared to Death is not surprised. But also, still aware that a strong, intense, devoted belief in non-scientific things like this can take you, if you are not careful, into some pretty dangerous places, grounded in little more than your desire for things to be true. Soon, Johnson veered further into alternative religions and away from traditional science, even while he landed a professor's job in Australia. In 1934, he was appointed the 3rd Master of Queen's College at the University of Melbourne, a prestigious position that he would hold until he retired many decades later in 1964. And while he taught scientific classes, mainly physics it seems, personally outside of class he was growing more and more interested in metaphysics and spirituality, alternative religions. He authored books on the paranormal and the spiritual world, including The Imprisoned Splendor in 1953, Nurslings of Immortality in 1957, and Watcher on the Hills in 1959. The Imprisoned Splendor has chapters on reincarnation, karma, mystical experience, telepathy, clairvoyance, the survival of death, etc. Nurslings of Immortality is all about Douglas Fawcett's philosophy of Imaginism, which argues that reality, said to be inherently psychical, is sustained in existence by God's developing imagination and by the imagination of innumerable other sub-intelligences. The book explains how Imaginism works, how it contrasts with a scientific worldview, the nature of psychical research, the religious point of view, the birth of systems within a cosmic context, the adventure of being man and reincarnation, evil, causation, group souls, and more. The Watcher on the Hills examines 36 cases of supposed mystical and spiritually transformative encounters experienced by ordinary people. The higher self, the soul, the personality, higher mystical experience, and cosmic consciousness are all examined. So clearly this dude, not afraid to examine pretty much fucking anything, was not opposed to entertaining a belief in, some pretty out there stuff. Easy to see why Anne wanted to meet him. Like, he was perfect for what she had in mind. She was so calculating, which makes me think that her formation of her cult had nothing to do with familial mental illness. It had everything to do with, her being a con artist. Dr. Johnson was nearing the end of his academic career when she met him. He was 60 years old, had been searching for proof of something more than science could show him for decades. He desperately wanted to believe in something truly mystical and life-altering. He was ready. He had become fixated on a personal quest to achieve a true mystical experience. And right before he met Anne, he had truly started to believe that he had been chosen by spirits to speak to his generation about the real true nature of the universe and human existence. He was entering his mad scientist wackadoodle era. In 1960, the then Australian Prime Minister Robert Menzies opened a wing at Queen's College in Dr. Rayner's name. He makes him even more prestigious. He's so well connected. He's so well respected. And he's also, strongly searching for this powerful spiritual experience. He's waiting for a fucking guru, waiting for someone who claiming to be a prophet or a god. And Anne is dreaming of becoming a well-connected, well-respected woman. Right? Of course they meet. 1962, Anne started a casual relationship with a man named Michael Riley, a very calculated move. Riley was her pawn. He just didn't know it. This relationship was essential for Anne to conduct reconnaissance on Dr. Rayner Johnson. Michael was Dr. Johnson's gardener. Anne literally started fucking this guy's gardener in exchange for intel on him. Anne began quietly siphoning inside information from an unsuspecting Riley on the impressive Dr. Johnson. Meanwhile, she was also befriending and flirting with people at Queen's College, a place she had no business hanging around at, who began drip-feeding her even more details about Dr. Johnson, his home life, and his relationship with his wife. She was such a snake. Eventually, Anne had gathered enough intel to make her move. And what a move it was. Very shrewd. On December 22nd, 1962, this is so dramatic, in the middle of the night, Anne Hamilton dramatically shows up on Dr. Raynor Johnson's doorstep. She knocks on the door, introduces herself. When he answers, introduces herself to a very confused, still half asleep Dr. Johnson. She quickly says she is a clairvoyant with an urgent message to share with him. She tells him that she knows he is traveling to India very soon with his wife, Mary. And she is there to warn him that if he does that, she's going to get quite sick. Well, Dr. Johnson, instead of reacting with some version of, okay, yeah, cool. Thank you, but fuck off. If you ever show up at my house again at any time, I will call the police, you fucking lunatic. No, he's grateful and dazzled by Anne's, prescience. Her knowledge of future events. He really wanted to believe that he was in the presence of a true clairvoyant. His trip to India was only days away, so he didn't have to wait long to see if her warning was going to come true. A few days later, after apparently deciding he's willing to risk his wife's health, Dr. Johnson and his wife fly to India. All goes well for a couple days, but then Mary falls severely ill with acute dysentery. A really bad form of diarrhea, basically. Gnarly, but, and this is important, very common amongst Western travelers to India at that time. Anne, for sure, knew it was a common affliction. People traveling to India from Australia got sick often back then. She played the odds, and you know what? It worked. To Dr. Johnson, Mary's illness was all the proof he needed that A, Anne was exactly who she said she was, and B, there was a supernatural force out there after all. He found it, and it came in the form of an attractive, flirtatious, charismatic woman showing up at his door in the middle of the damn night. Upon their return to Australia, Dr. Johnson and his wife both eagerly fucked Anne Hamilton's brains out. No, they embraced her. And now told Dr. Johnson that she had received a divine plan, and he was a very important part of it. Oh, how fortunate. Anne told them that she had experienced external life and had a perspective outside the constraints of physical being, due to her astral projections, etc. She had traveled through the cosmos, astrally, and now had returned to Earth as the Messiah. And Dr. Johnson and his wife didn't blink. They didn't ask her to leave. No, this was incredibly affirming for Dr. Johnson. He was fascinated with metaphysics, the study of things that exist beyond the earthly, and believed he had come into contact with a woman who was living proof, or so she claimed, of experience beyond physicality. In the 1930s through the 1950s, there was a lot of doubt and disinterest in metaphysics as a point of study because of logical positivism, the movement that insisted only science and verification mattered. But by the 1960s, interest in metaphysics was appearing again in academic and spiritual circles. And while Dr. Johnson was described as a very kindly old man and very clever, he was also described by former cult member Sarah Moore as, quote, very, very, very gullible. Dr. Johnson and Anne also bonded over Helena Blavatsky. They both had read a ton of her teachings, if you want to call them that. Always love it when that complete fucking maniac shows up in an episode. And she always seems to show up if we dive into a cult based in Eastern or New Age beliefs. She deserves a little summary. Madame Helena Petrovna, there we go. Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, known to her followers as simply HPB, which sounds a lot like an STI, was one of the most eccentric and influential mystics of the 19th century. Born into Russian nobility in 1831. Probably. Hard to ascertain what's true about her origins because she was caught in so many lies about her early life, and some of her supposed family members who vouched for her also caught in lies. But she claimed to have psychic gifts that she began to experience, very early in childhood. Also claimed to have ran away from home in what was then Russia, what is now Dnipro, Ukraine, in her teens, then embarked on decades of globe-trotting adventures that blurred the line between possible truth and very creative, definitely not true autobiography. And she insisted, almost certainly mostly made up, that she traveled with Bedouins, lived with Tibetan monks, studied magic in India, survived shipwrecks, got into sword fights, and had various spiritual assassination attempts made on her. Also may or may not have, but definitely fucking did, fake a few seances and materialize spirit letters with the help of a hidden cupboard. Oh yeah, she had a hidden cupboard. Do you have a hidden magical cupboard? No? Oh, how sad for you. HPBs, I always want to say different letters. Her hidden cupboard Really a controversial bookcase / recess in her room at the Theosophical Society headquarters in Adair, India, examined in 1884 by the Society for Psychical Research as part of their so-called Hodgson report, a 200-page report in which Blavatsky was described as one of the most accomplished, ingenious, and interesting imposters in history. The report alleged it was a secret compartment used to produce supposed supernatural phenomena in very natural but just sneaky ways. Basically, the SPR concluded that she was a highly skilled, grifty weasel woman pretending to receive messages from the great beyond, but in reality, she was nothing more than an old-timey David Copperfield illusionist writing messages herself. Backing up a bit, in 1875, she co-founded the Theosophical Society with Henry Steele Olcott, another douchebag, and William Q. Judge, a third douchebag, a movement dedicated to blending Eastern religions, Western occultism, and whatever ancient secrets Blavatsky claimed to have psychically downloaded from immortal Himalayan Highlander superwizards known as the Mahatmas. HBP was a creative powerhouse, a proto-New Age influencer, one of history's greatest self-mythologizers. What she was very likely not was someone who actually possessed mystical knowledge, given to her from gods, aliens, the dead, etc. Her two massive books, 1877's Isis Unveiled and 1888's The Secret Doctrine, became the foundational text for modern occultism and seeded ideas that later spiritual influencers would adapt, including the leaders of many cults like Anne Hamilton-Byrne's The Family, New Age spiritual movements, and even bits of pop culture fantasy. And now, before jumping back into Anne's story, since she leaned on a lot of Blavatsky's teachings in the formation of her cult ideology, let's look a bit more at the teachings of Theosophy. The really short version, the short summary of Theosophy is ancient aliens meets Buddhism meets Victorian psychedelia. Now for an explanation that's has a bit more depth. At its core, Theosophy aimed to uncover the world's hidden spiritual truth by synthesizing Hinduism, Buddhism, Hermeticism, an ancient esoteric spiritual and philosophical system based on ancient Greek beliefs, alchemy, and astrology and more, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Victorian pseudoscience, and some very creative myth-making. She plagiarized all kinds of ancient religious beliefs, mixed them into a new recipe for a dish no one had eaten before, adding a lot of her own made-up ingredients to become the godmother of the New Age movement, even though I would bet that most New Age adherents today don't even know her name. Her Theosophy insists that it possesses the true ancient history of humanity, far older, weirder, more catastrophic than anything lying archaeologists have ever uncovered. Stop hiding the truth from us! Since she's not the star of today's show, but this shit is so entertaining, let me provide a very distilled version of Theosophy's most extreme teachings, such as Atlantis and the Weird Wizard War. Blavatsky absolutely claimed that Atlantis was real, populated by psychically gifted giants, you heard that right, and was eventually destroyed because of a cosmic war involving all kinds of occult superpowers. Okay, according to HBP, the Atlanteans were the fourth root race, an evolutionary stage of humanity before us. They had third eyes, supernatural abilities, some dope as fuck psychic technology. Some turned evil and misused their powers. Others warred with rival ancient races. Ultimately, their misuse of magical knowledge caused their lost continent to literally sink and disappear. It all comes across as part fantasy novel, part ancient astronaut theory, and part Victorian fever dream. Moving along, the following teaching of HBP's is one of the ideas that later New Age figures, Nazi occultists, and countless conspiracy theorists have mined for decades. The 7 root races, aka humanity, Pokemon evolutions. Blavatsky claimed humans evolved through 7 great cosmic stages, each with sub-races. Stay with me. Here's some highlights. The first root race was purely ethereal astral beings with no bones, no organs even. Just floating, glowing, proto-human things. The second root race was the Hyperboreans, giant asexual telepathic beings living near the North Pole back when it was a tropical paradise, which would be 55 million years ago. The third root race was the Lemurians, towering brown-skinned beings who reproduced by budding like magical potatoes. They lived on the lost continent of Lemuria, also had functioning third eyes, but on the back of their heads. And some of them are currently living inside of Mount Shasta, California. Oh, fuck yeah, bro. Right? This all sounds so legit. The fourth root race is the Atlanteans. magical giants with psychic faculties. They built flying machines powered by thought, as one does. They ultimately were destroyed by wizard infighting. Such a shame. The fifth root race is us. How the fuck did we move backwards to us? The previous two root races were way cooler than us. We're just regular ass humans with no cool psychic powers at all. Fucking sucks. And then there's root races 6 and 7, which is going to be future evolved beings who will eventually redevelop psychic powers, live in unity, and transcend material existence. Unfortunately, there's no timeline for exactly when that will happen. The entire system reads like an AD&D campaign, written during someone's psychotic break. Now, let me learn you a thing or two about the Mahatmas. The secret Himalayan psychic super wizards Blavatsky received much of her wisdom from thanks to telepathic communication. Theosophy claims that all of its teachings come from a cadre of immortal adepts, ascended masters, living hidden in remote mountainous parts of Tibet and Nepal. Why? Who fucking knows? They could live somewhere with a much more hospitable climate, but they choose to hide in fucking snow mountain caves. The names of these masters include Kut Humi, Moria, and Djwal, Djwal Kul. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing those correctly, and who fucking cares? Because this is just shit she pulled out of her ass. Blavatsky insisted she had telepathic access to these beings who precipitated letters into physical space for her followers. They just manifested letters. Critics have noted that the Mahatma's handwriting suspiciously resembles Helena's handwriting. Theosophy taught and teaches that these masters have managed the spiritual evolution of humanity, kind of like some type of cosmic DMV. Theosophy embraces reincarnation, but it's added some layers of cosmic administration. Your soul passes through various planes after death, and then you spend centuries in a bliss realm, aka Devachan. Then you are reborn into the appropriate root race stage, and you just keep going until you become a master, unless karma says otherwise, in which case you get fucking yeeted back into the primordial stew to be reborn again. Blavatsky claimed advanced theosophical initiates could achieve powers, including, but not limited to, right? If you follow her teachings, you can do the following things and more: telepathy, teleportation, clairvoyance, materializing objects out of thin air, seeing both past and future, entering astral realms, influencing the weather, levitation. Basically, if you study theosophy long and hard enough, you'll become the newest member of the X-Men. HPV, HPB, even demonstrated some of these powers at seances until investigators noticed trapdoors and accomplices. So Anne Hamilton-Byrne took Blavatsky's wackadoodle cosmology, all that shit I just went over and more, dead seriously. Or at the very least, she became very, very fluent in theosophy speak and pretended to believe it in order to achieve her goal of being worshipped by people she believed would never leave her, her chosen and brainwashed family. She believed, or again claimed to believe, that she was a reincarnated spiritual master, that the children she adopted / kidnapped were advanced souls forming a new root race, that the family was preparing for an apocalyptic shift in human evolution, that suffering, including the abuse she inflicted, was spiritually purifying. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Closing this side quest on Madame Blavatsky, while HPB herself never founded a cult, her writings gave later charismatic leaders like Anne a ready-made mythological framework to claim a godlike destiny. And again, Dr. Raynor Johnson, also super familiar with all this bullshit, a believer of the teachings of HPB, or at least like close to a believer, which says a lot about this academically brilliant man, but maybe, little too open to wackadoodle claims of self-proclaimed spiritual masters man. And it wasn't long before Dr. Johnson became totally enamored with Anne. He became her puppet, began sending her referrals, mainly friends, some of whom were suffering personal crises. Dear God. Feeding the desperate to a burgeoning cult leader. During the cult's early days, Dr. Johnson continued working as a master at Queen's College, a post the university strongly deplored once his associations with Anne and her cult came to light years later. The university would maintain that no university students were ever lured into her cult, nor recruited for it, and there is no evidence actually to suggest that they were. Dr. Johnson, along with his wife Mary and their daughter Maureen, made up Anne's first followers and literally recognized her as Jesus Christ returned. When I come across stuff like this, my mind often wanders over to what the close friends and family of these people must think of things like this. Like, imagine going to spend Christmas or Hanukkah with your family, and suddenly your parents like, can I talk to you about something? We have truly wonderful news. We recently met a local yoga teacher who is Jesus Christ, and we'd like you to join us in worshiping her so we can all survive the upcoming apocalypse. Okay, Mom. Can you pass me the ham? I just feel like this isn't something I should weigh in on an empty stomach. For the honor of being the first to truly recognize who she really was, Anne proclaimed Dr. Johnson as John the Baptist reincarnate. How exciting for him. What an honor. Great news, kids. New Jesus just named New John the Baptist. So Dad is New John the Baptist. So it seems only natural that, he shouldn't have to help with cooking or cleaning up the dishes this year. Soon, with the cult membership still small enough to count on one hand, Anne and Johnson would begin drawing up strict guidelines for their future followers based on a mixture of Eastern theosophical and Christian religious beliefs. In 1963, now the family is officially founded, with Anne as the founder and Dr. Rayner Johnson as the co-founder. And if Dr. Johnson needed any more conviction in Anne's powers, 1963 was also the year she performed her first documented miracle. According to the book The Family, authored by Chris Johnston and Rosie Johns, another source we leaned on quite a bit for this episode, in May of 1963, Anne's biological daughter Judith rolled her car in the outskirts of Melbourne, fracturing her skull and wounding an eye pretty badly, I guess. And Dr. Johnson wrote that Anne saved her in a diary entry. Her mother immediately organized spirit help. And a week later, Judy left the hospital much earlier than expected and in good shape. Oh yeah, that couldn't have come from medical treatment. That definitely came from organized spirit help. Johnson told his wife, quote, "I think this is the most Christ-like person I've ever met." So that's cool. This cemented Johnson's belief, if it wasn't cemented already, that Anne was truly Jesus reborn as a woman. A weird, very flexible, plastic surgery-loving, flirty 42-year-old woman. He convinced himself that whatever she said was true. That if something was confusing, who cares? Oh, gee, Jesus' disciples in the Middle East, they were often confused and doubtful. A Messiah doesn't need to make sense, okay? Dr. Johnson's fanatical endorsement was worth its weight in gold. The family, led by both of them in a way now, started off as what seemed like a discussion meditation group. They would meet at Anne's home in Ferny Creek in the Dandenong Ranges, a leafy community surrounded by trees, hills, and waterfalls. Very pretty, about an hour's drive from Melbourne city center. This allowed cult members to maintain their professional high-flying careers back in the city while also participating in what was quickly becoming a cult. In early 1964, Dr. Johnson retired from the school and devoted his life to the cult. He and his wife purchased a property just down the road from Anne, and the gatherings were transferred there. Before moving forward, I should point out that while today the cult is most commonly referred to as the family, back then to members it was known as the Great White Brotherhood. And that is not a nod to some kind of white supremacist organization, by the way. The name's a nod to earlier theosophy-influenced groups like Guy and Edna Ballard's I Am movement. We've talked about those fucking wackadoodles. That movement claims that Saint Germain, it's still around in some form, there's still a handful of members. It claims that Saint Germain, one of the ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood, perfected beings of great power who supposedly communicate via human messengers, appeared on Mount Shasta, a dormant volcano in Northern California. Not the Lemurians, but close. The Great White Brotherhood are believed to be a group of spiritual guides, and the Lemurians, a purported ancient civilization, as I went over, some of whom are connected, though, to the Brotherhood. The Great White Brotherhood, also known as the Ascended Masters, are a spiritual hierarchy. Lemurians, a mythical root race from the lost continent of Lemuria, as we went over, and some of the Lemurians do live in a hidden crystalline city, kind of like Superman's fucking Fortress of Solitude, named Telos, beneath Mount Shasta. Okay? Do you see? Do you understand? It's all pretty fucking straightforward. If you're humming along at the correct vibrational frequency, and if you're keeping your aura nice and clean and lotioned up and your chakras polished or some shit. This idea of cosmic journeys, past lives, and advanced spiritual beings might sound familiar, and may have also been likely was drawing from the teachings of another cult that we covered here a long time ago. The Church of Scientology had been founded by L. Ron Hubbard, that fucking wonderful mystic prophet god, that alien fucker, in 1954. And taught that Hubbard Getting these wackadoodles mixed up. L. Ron Hubbard taught that humans carried past traumas that clouded their ability to experience reality, but through his Dianetic auditing, they can reach a state called clear. Anne's followers were soon going to be subjected to a different version of getting clear in the form of clearines, almost exactly the same word, which we'll get into shortly. But while Hubbard was vehemently anti-drug, in Anne's growing cult, drugs are everywhere. Fuck yeah, bro. Cult. Where's the orgy? Early members of the family regularly dabbled in magic mushrooms and LSD. Okay, now I'm listening, Anne. Now I'm open to you being new Jesus. Sorry I've doubted you. Maybe you are the Messiah. These substances would become a major part of what Anne called the pipeline, a chemical bridge between skepticism and spiritual surrender, used to soften resistance and make her followers putty in her hands. Anne saw how gullible and moldable people were under the influence of mind-expanding substances, and she began plotting where and how she could access a generous, undisrupted supply of LSD. A little bit about acid. LSD had been first synthesized in 1938. Thank you very much, Mr. Albert Hoffman. Then truly discovered by Albert to be a psychedelic drug in 1943 when that gem of a meat sack went on one of the coolest bike rides of all time. And by the 1960s, it had become the drug of choice for the global counterculture movement, spilling out of clinical settings and government experiments into the real world. In Australia, LSD was used in clinical psychotherapy throughout the 1950s and 60s. But by 1966, regular reporting, read propaganda, of good kids turn bad had pushed it into moral panic territory. Nixon's war on drugs led to psychedelics being classified as Schedule I substances in the U.S., and access tightened up, not just in America, but around the world. And by the 1970s, the legal supply would almost completely dry up in most places. But before any of that concerned her, Anne was focused on her next important recruit, Dr. Howard Whitaker, an LSD evangelist, a guy with access to so much LSD, and a leading psychiatrist who was beating the drum of allowing the use of LSD in treating psychiatric conditions. And you know what? I got to give Anne a lot of credit. She was a piece of shit, but she wasn't stupid. She was so strategic with her early recruits. Dr. Johnson was a monumental get, and Whitaker would be a huge as well. I can't think of an equivalent cult leader when it comes to this style of recruiting. I mean, typically they target wealthy people or the desperately curious who are often down in their luck or both. And also, since most cult leaders are horny dudes, they go for young, impressionable, attractive women. But Anne was not driven by a lust for sex. That didn't cloud her judgment with any of this. She was driven by a lust for power, a certain type of power to have a group of people who would worship her and be completely devoted to her. And also money. You know, as you'll see, very, very clearly driven by a desire to become wealthy. In the early 1960s, Whitaker, her next targeted all-star recruit, was conducting a pioneering LSD study at New Haven, this private psychiatric clinic housed in a, quote, glorious Gothic mansion built in 1892 by wealthy tea tycoons. That sounds fucking incredible. I'd love to trip there. Minus any cult shit. Or maybe just minus, like, too much cult stuff. Tripping with some cult members might lead to a really fun story to tell people at parties later. While Howard's initial LSD study was legitimate and above board, once Anne's influence reached him, it would be exploited to oblivion. Dr. Whitaker at the time was feeling lost in his religious beliefs and was introduced to Anne Hamilton through his good friend, none other than respected colleague, Dr. Raynor Johnson. Of course, without Dr. Johnson, none of what follows would have probably ever happened. He was the key Anne used to unlock her inner cult leader. Whitaker was also immediately taken with Anne, who wasted no time, initiated him into her group with some kind of ceremony that lasted for about 2 hours. Decades later, Whitaker told police that in this ceremony, quote, the initiate promises obedience to the teacher. And Anne claimed that because of her guru status, she was able to take over responsibility for resolving their karma, leading them towards ultimate liberation. Now, when Anne and her posse were not at the Ferny Creek, or now, going forward, when Anne and her posse aren't at the Ferny Creek headquarters, she spent time at the New Haven Psychiatric Clinic, deepening her relationship with Whitaker, also befriending other prominent psychiatrists such as Harry Bethune and John Mackey, and even New Haven's owner, Joy Villemick. Holy shit, was she clever and conniving. All three of those people would also join the family, and as a result, New Haven began shifting towards a new spiritual therapeutic approach. This is fucking wild. The 60s were such a crazy time. So much curiosity, so much seeking, and at times definitely way too much curiosity, way too much seeking. The New Haven Psychiatric Facility became the family's primary recruiting ground. And very soon, it would also become the site of a bunch of strange punishment and torture where LSD would be misappropriated for increasingly cruel and sinister purposes. Sect-aligned psychiatrists soon obtained LSD free of charge or, from the health department, or they did. I shouldn't say soon. They were obtaining this. I mean, which is fucking awesome. Wish I had that access. Medical grade LSD? Can someone please tell me how to get a lifetime supply of that? I won't deal it, I promise. I mean, I'll definitely give it to friends and some strangers who seem cool. But that's it. Come on, LSD lab tech, listen to this show, hook me up. Anne was networking at New Haven, but not solely at New Haven. High in her own supply, her confidence growing by the day, she also extended her reach into judicial, legal, academic, other medical circles in the state of Victoria, reasons for which will become apparent shortly. Also kept teaching yoga. And students of hers are being plucked out as potential initiates and referred to New Haven under the guise of requiring psychiatric drug therapy to sort out their lives. But instead of truly getting that therapy, they'll just be dosed with a shitload of LSD, groomed and brainwashed to believe that Anne is the Messiah. 1965 now. New Jesus marries a gardener, Michael Riley. Man, the Messiah loves to fuck gardeners, I guess. But their marriage lasts only 1 year. What? New Jesus got divorced? You'd think the son of God, or I guess the daughter of God in this case, someone who, won over her first big follower with claims of seeing the future, would have seen a divorce coming and not married that dude. And, been pretty against divorce. The divorce might have had something to do with Riley being admitted to New Haven during their brief marriage, where he spent most of his stay under the influence of a lot of acid. This shit is so bonkers. I was worried this all wouldn't be crazy enough after last week's King of Beaver Island episode, but I think I'm wrong. After the dissolution of her marriage, Anne moved on with a new man, Bill Byrne, described by former cult children as nothing more than a handsome, rich, compliant handbag. Perfect. That's all New Jesus really needs. Some arm candy, right? A hard dick when she needs that itch scratched. A handsome yes man to give her more credibility. Let her appear like the wholesome matriarch, Messiah. Also, Bill is loaded. Bill was a wealthy Englishman. He ran a huge construction business in Traralgon, a city of nearly 80,000, also in Victoria. Was a member of the local city council, had 4 children. The day Anne Hamilton met Bill would change both their lives forever. Anne met Bill at New Haven, where his son was receiving treatment for drug use problems. Anne decided right then and there, after undoubtedly learning that he was loaded, that he was the man she was going to marry next. But there was a problem. Bill Byrne was already married to May Byrne, and May was not stepping aside easily. She was a fighter. She refused to let Anne break up her family, or at least tried to refuse. Fucking shocked that New Jesus is a homewrecker. Didn't see that coming. He has changed a lot since Nazareth. Almost unrecognizable. Anne was determined to have him. She wielded her connections, arranged for May to be admitted against her fucking will to New Haven under the pretense of mental instability. That is evil. She knew that if you had 2 psychiatrists, if you could get 2 of them to agree that somebody needed to be committed, they would be involuntarily committed and there wasn't shit they could do about it. And she had more than 2 psychiatrists under her spell. So she could just have anyone committed at this point, if she could just trick them into showing up to the clinic. Once poor May Byrne was admitted, she was heavily sedated, given all kinds of drugs, including LSD, to keep her confused. And by the end of her stay, she and Bill were no more. He'd been granted a divorce, right? She also had friends and that were like judges. My God. She had her lover's wife institutionalized so she could steal her husband. New Jesus is fucking ruthless. Anne changed her name from Anne Hamilton to Anne Hamilton-Byrne now. Used what happened to May as a warning to other sect members. If they dared cross her, she would threaten them with institutionalization. And that would happen sometimes because of her influence. Oh my God. How did she convince so many highly educated people not to push back against this behavior? Why are, so many seemingly smart people were first attracted to Anne, and the family is, of course, up for debate. She was clearly very persuasive, extremely charismatic. Didn't hurt that at this point in her life, she was also, very attractive. But lots of people are very attractive. And almost none of them pulls off shit like this. Just like Madame Blavatsky, there was some intangible type of magnetism she possessed. She was exceptionally skilled in playing up to people's egos, making them think that by joining her cult, they were going to be part of the most important inner circle in the history of inner circles. According to Fran Parker, an early member of the family, all the men in the cult were completely infatuated with Anne at this time. They had huge crushes on her. Bill, in particular, was beglamored by her. Fran compared Anne to being an enchantress from ancient ages that could, quote, enslave people with a glance. But infatuation had to cross the threshold into devotion and blind commitment somehow, and Anne needed both the men and women to believe that with her help, they could exist forever in a spiritual sense, having vanquished the past. All of Anne's initiates would come to believe that. They would come to accept Anne's proclamation that humanity was in its final karmic cycle, that after this life, there would be no further reincarnation for them. They had ascended. Through accepting Anne as Christ, they would live forever in blissful harmony and survive the upcoming apocalypse. Thank you, new Jesus. And with that kind of acceptance came total obedience. A former member told journalist Gerard Ryle that Anne was their living master, quote, the very center and soul and substance of the way of salvation laid down by the Supreme Father. Without the love and help of the living master, no soul could ever be liberated from the material world. Whew. But has powerful charisma, an exceptional ability to sell bullshit as truth. Good looks and flirty charm fully explain how a room full of doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, academics, lawyers could end up believing that the woman in front of them was actually Jesus Christ. Well, it seems that LSD helped with that. All sect members were taken to New Haven, where they were administered LSD in various ceremonies, and while in an especially fragile mental state, while their minds had been opened up more than one can open a mind naturally to accept new information on a deeper level, they came to believe she was Jesus Christ. According to Lex DeMann, a lead investigator into the criminal case that will try to take Anne down later, quote, once they were administered the LSD in a dark room, the door would appear open, and here would be Anne standing in a flowing white gown. Behind her was a bucket of dry ice, which permeated like smoke, and under the hallucinogenic drug LSD, they were made to be convinced that they were seeing the Almighty. They were seeing Jesus Christ. It's fucking wild. Former member Dave Whitaker was a teen when he was in the cult, and his father, also a cult member and a doctor, injected him with LSD numerous times over a period of several days for one of these ceremonies. He said, quote, Anne would come in every now and then and sit down beside me and whisper in my ear, who is Jesus? And then somehow the thought would pop into my head, you're Jesus. And then she'd say, that's right, David. You always knew I was the Lord. This is fucking diabolical and darkly brilliant. It actually reminds me of, I think it's called the Leap Ceremony in this new show on Netflix called Wayward, if any of you have seen this. They had to have been familiar with this. LSD helped Anne get deep, deep inside their minds. Former sect member Andrew Ogilvy admitted, quote, I went through a period where I would have died for Anne. Under these mind-expanding drugs, one was able to regress through one's life and back into past lives. This was clearing out things of the past. You had to go to Anne to get the clearing. In addition to mandating obedience, and also secrecy regarding her rituals and some of her teachings to not draw unwanted attention to what she was doing, Anne also flattered her followers, delighting them with revelations that they were on a noble path, that they had earned the right to advance spiritually into a future divine adventure. Oh boy. She was very gifted at making her followers feel exceptionally special, such an important skill for a cult leader. I've been waiting for you, Anne would say when first meeting a potential recruit. You are special. And it's so sad that so many of us meat sacks get so lonely and beaten down by life that that's all it takes to pull us into a cult sometimes. Just somebody telling us that we're so special. Once in the cult, there was only one rule. Do absolutely everything Anne said. According to former member Dave Whitaker, that included what to think, what to wear, what to eat, who to marry, who not to marry. Total obedience. Doesn't get much more culty than that. To further help understand how a cult like this forms, sociologists William Sims Bainbridge and Rodney Stark pointed to three formation models. The psychopathology model, when a leader's personal psychological issues like delusions, trauma, or a need for control lead them to create a group around their ideas. The entrepreneur model, when someone sees an opportunity to gain followers or resources by offering something new or exciting, like a spiritual product, teaching, or lifestyle. And then the subculture evolution model, when a group of receptive people already interested in alternative ideas come together around a leader's message. In Anne and the family's case, all three models perfectly converged. Her childhood trauma, her yoga, new age lifestyle, the 1960s counterculture that was all about throwing off the established order. And throughout the 1960s, Anne's young cult would continue to grow. They would eventually have several hundred followers, no exact figures known. Decades later, some former cult members described this period as being a very gradual immersion into new values. In a tale as old as time, no one ever thought they were getting into or were already part of a cult. Anne started not only recruiting wealthy professionals, but remixing their lives now. At her request, they changed their names, they left their marriages, they signed over all their assets, which were often substantial, even had children with new partners at her behest. She had total control over them. But then this all created a new problem for Anne. She'd broken up families to build her cult, but she still had no real family of her own except for Bill and her grown daughter, Judith. She was surrounded by devoted men and women who worshipped her, but she also wanted more children of her own. And Anne needed a way to build a family that did not rely on giving birth herself, for she was nearly 50. By the early 1970s, most members were donating a majority of their income to Anne. Many had given Anne a ton of cash and other assets they'd accumulated long before they met her. She was flush with cash, and this money, created new possibilities for her and her cult. Anne's influence expanded as her property portfolio increased. The cult's motto was unseen, unheard, unknown. But as the group grew to hundreds of people sworn to absolute secrecy, they needed more room, and that room had to be secluded. So Anne built a chapel in the Dandadongs, named it Shantini Katan Lodge, meaning abode of peace, named after an ashram in Tagore, India. And Shantini Katan Lodge was a low-lying red brick building which became the family's temple, cementing the cult and giving it focus. Cult members would gather twice a week to hear sermons from Anne, either in person, seated on a purple chair, or her throne, under a large crucifix, or recorded onto a cassette tape. If any of those old sermons still exist on tapes, it doesn't seem they have made it online yet, which is unfortunate. Anne announced to her followers that they needed to start collecting children to rebuild humanity. This is how she can get her family. After a coming nuclear apocalypse or some other ecological catastrophe in which humanity will perish. Weird to me that New Jesus couldn't be more specific. Which is it, New Jesus? Nuclear apocalypse or some other ecological catastrophe? And when exactly is it? It was Anne's responsibility as New Jesus, with the help of the family, to prepare the next generation to re-educate the world and carry on her teachings when the time came. Totally. Anne was apparently pretty paranoid when it came to the possibility of nuclear war. That may have not been some bullshit fear tactic. She seems to have actually been concerned that a nuclear apocalypse was imminent. She became more and more paranoid in general as time went on, that unbelievers, that critics, people who thought she was nothing more than a grifter was going to try and kill her. So she started buying up more and more properties, taking over entire streets in the outer Melbourne suburb of Ferny Creek because she wanted strength in numbers and protection. All the money she was taking from followers allowed her to buy a lot of privacy. And then in 1971, the family bought a 5-acre compound surrounded by a barbed wire fence hidden amongst dense bushland, named it Kai Lama, a reference to Buddhism, and it was situated in Lake Eildon, a popular now but pretty quiet then holiday spot in Victoria. The property was known as Uptop and was where Anne and the adult cult members, and it was far from where Anne and the adult cult members lived in Ferny Creek, roughly a 3-hour drive. Ferny Creek was now where the ritual centers would be located, where the chapel was, where all the Anne worship would happen, and where most of the adult members will live. The Lake Eildon property is going to be where Anne's children are going to live, her new kids. Right after they bought the compound in 1971, children started to arrive. 7 at first, all of whom were the biological children of various sect members. Ben Shenton, for example, was just 18 months old when his mom, a devoted cult member, sent him to live at the new children's compound, away from her. She would live back in Ferny Creek. She straight up just gave her baby boy over to her cult leader to be raised in the kid version of a puppy mill. Other cult members would soon go through a legal adoption process, and then once they had their adopted child, they would hand the baby over to Anne, and the baby would grow up in the compound. This is fucking bonkers. Anne turned to her inner circle in the medical sphere and instructed the cult's doctors, nurses, and social workers to keep an eye out for children in need, like Wayne Callister, whose mother had given birth to him when she was just 16. Years later, when Wayne was a child, his mother suddenly collapsed, and cult nurse Elizabeth Whitaker swooped in, offered to let Wayne stay with her temporarily while his mother was sent to the hospital, and then she handed him straight over to Anne's cult. According to some reports, Anne would even get her corrupt doctors to make single mothers sick, to poison them, so that they were not physically capable of taking care of their kids, and then she would be able to snatch them. Again, Jesus has changed so much. Woo, man. Maybe he's fucking salty about getting crucified or something. I don't care for new Jesus. Despite orchestrating all of this blatantly shady shit, Anne's followers continued to worship her like a god, and they were willing to do anything for her, which was good for Anne because she wanted more kids. She continued to exploit an already broken system to get them. Back then, there were no pensions or support systems for young mothers. Having a kid out of wedlock carried huge shame, as I mentioned earlier, but also wasn't rare. 1970, one baby in 12 was born to an unmarried mother who was often cast as unfit by just default. This was before IVF became available in 1980. For infertile couples desperate to have kids, the pregnant single mother to adoption pipeline became the answer. These adoptions were often closed, and the baby was removed immediately before any contact could be made with the birth mother, a practice rooted in the so-called clean break theory, which held that if a baby was separated from its unmarried mother immediately at birth and placed in a stable adoptive home, the kid's personality would be shaped entirely by the new environment rather than genetics. I mean, it's definitely not true, but that's what they thought back then. The system was also crawling with systemic abuse. Started the moment a single mother walked into the antenatal clinic, desperate for help, but that help often never came. Anne Hamilton-Byrne had her network of sect doctors and social workers watching for pregnant teen girls who came to the hospitals for routine checkups or, various health concerns. Anne's insiders would stamp the mother-to-be's hospital card with an A to alert labor ward staff that others had made the decision and not the mother, which would determine how the delivery would now go. And then during delivery, mothers would be forced into stirrups, shackled to the bed, sedated into submission. Many reported hearing the door slam before they could even hear their newborn cry, their child taken against their will. And there wasn't shit they could do about it. Not really. They didn't have enough money to lawyer up and fight. And doctors and other staff would just explain to the police, if the police were called, that this had been done in the baby's best interest. In some cases, birth mothers were even told that their baby had died when they hadn't. In other cases, mothers were falsely told that their kids were born malformed or disabled. Just evil shit. Anne would also perform miracles in exchange for kids. She would select doctors who were willing to cooperate, sometimes have them deliberately inflict an illness. I mean, this is alleged, but people seem pretty sure this happened. Sometimes having them deliberately inflict an illness on the mother of a young child. And once the mom was bedridden and weakened, Anne would appear and offer to cure her, but only in exchange for absolute obedience and the surrender of the child. To explain the ever-growing herd of children showing up at the compound, Anne apparently told members that she was the mother of every arrival, like the biological mother. Even though some of these babies, weren't even like newborns. But you know what? It's miracles. That's how miracles work. They don't have to make sense. She would apparently even wear maternity clothes, despite being in her 50s now. Later, she kept doing this following having a hysterectomy she had in the mid-1970s. Did I mention that cult members were still frequently being dosed with LSD and being brainwashed into continuing to believe that Anne's the Messiah and that she's able to pump out babies in her 50s without even showing signs of being pregnant? The children, adopted, stolen, handed over, whatever, were all given the last name Hamilton-Byrne and raised to believe they were the biological, children of Anne and Bill. They were siblings. No matter what they actually look like, they were told this. In addition to the adopted children, the offspring of other sect members would come visit the house on the weekends, sometimes stay for long stints that might even last for years in some occasions. At the cult's peak, 28 kids lived at the property at the same time, and at least half believed that the Hamilton-Byrnes were their biological parents. There to love and take and care for them. But of course, Anne would not actually love and care for them. She would do weird shit, though. Anne wanted the kids to look as identical as possible, so she groomed them to resemble one another and her. She would have her own hair bleached white blonde, and she would have their hair bleached white blonde, except for the few kids who were allowed to keep their natural hair color because it was a good match for Bill's dark hair. The kids would also be given identical haircuts, dressed in identical outfits. You can find pics of these kids online, and it's so fucking creepy. Like, they have been dressed up to look like they're plain cult kids in a cult movie. It just is cartoonishly culty. Many years later, conspiracy theories will emerge that WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, with his white hair that some have described as bleach blonde, had been a family cult kid. He does kind of look like he's one of those kids. He's not, But there is a connection. In the 1970s, when he was a kid, his mother's boyfriend, some amateur musician named Leif Maynell Hamilton, was a family cult member. So that's a weird connection. Anyway, Anne dressed her kids in old-fashioned matching velvet smocks with polished dress shoes. They look like a big homegrown Von Trapp family. It's so weird. She told her followers that these kids were, again, to be a new race of humans. According to one former cult kid, they were bestowed with the responsibility to be the perfect children who would save the world. No pressure. Anne would grace her kids with her heavenly presence, sometimes adorned in pearls and diamonds and designer outfits, covered in Chanel perfume. She would frequently play the harp and sing songs in perfect pitch soprano to the kids. I imagined her sitting on a giant pillow made to look like a fucking cloud while doing this. This is insanity. At quick glance, Anne looked like her version of the perfect mother, with a picture-perfect family that she'd always dreamed of. And this image had a purpose: marketing. Anne would film happy family videos, or have them filmed, which then acted as recruitment tools, showing off her beautiful, bleach blonde children. She's singing beautiful songs with them to entice new weird cult members. I tried so hard to locate one of these old videos online, but just couldn't find one. Like there'd be like tiny little clips of them in some documentaries, but just not enough. Oh man, would have been a great get. Some of these children will later claim that they were bribed with chocolate to act and sing, which was a good bribe considering they were often starved. Misbehavior in the family could mean going without food for the kids up to a full week. The kids' daily lives, not heavenly. They were rigidly structured, as lives are often in cults. At 6 a.m., they would wake up and make their beds. Then they would shower, boys and girls on alternate days. Then the kids' day really began with 1 hour of hatha yoga, fucking hour, followed by 15 minutes listening to recorded sermons by either Anne or this Indian guru she liked named Muktananda, a dude who, by the way, faced numerous credible accusations later in life of having sex with teen girls decades younger than him, telling them it was part of some important ritual that would give them more tantric energy or some bullshit. Fucking 99% of the time. If a cult leader or guru has a dick, he's going to stick it in places that is not legal. Following listening to some bullshit sermon came 15 minutes of mantra chants, then 50 minutes of meditation, then 15 minutes to set up the schoolroom, which had been approved by Australia's Department of Education. Breakfast was at 8. It consisted only of fruit. Anne was not a big fan of the food pyramid, I don't think. The kids then did 3 hours of schoolwork, followed by another hour of meditation. Oh, man, because we all know little kids love to sit still and meditate. Lunch was steamed vegetables and fruit. No one gave a shit about protein. Followed by 3 to 4 hours of more schoolwork. Then the kids would pack up their classroom, and from 5 to 9 p.m., they would mostly meditate again. Fucking enough with the meditation. And then they would have a bland vegetarian dinner, like a late dinner, and then finish homework, read spiritual texts on Hindu, Buddhism, theosophy, Christian beliefs, whatever fucking Anne was mixing together, and then go to sleep. That would be an intense schedule for anybody, let alone a kid, with no room for basic play or real enjoyment or just vital nutrients. Cult experts argue that this is deliberate, of course. We've seen this kind of shit, so many times before. Keep your followers constantly busy, keep them tired, malnourished, confused, break them down so that they will believe anything you tell them. Researcher Jessie Meikle, in her work on imposed anorexia, suggests that leaders like Anne use extreme food restrictions to keep members, tired, physically feeble, and disoriented. But what happens when these kids disobeyed? Because of course they're going to disobey. They're kids. How could they possibly stick to a rigid schedule? How could they resist trying to steal extra rations when they were hungry? Well, when they did that, they would be punished severely. The responsibility of handling or disciplining the kids fell to women called aunties. This is some fucking Handmaid's Tale shit. For a long time, the aunties were Patricia McFarlane, Elizabeth Whitaker, and Margot McClellan. 3 women fiercely loyal to Anne who enforced her strict orders as if their lives depended on it. They were under constant pressure to keep Anne happy and maintain their grip on a house full of kids who were not theirs. And they were not afraid to use force. If the kids, did something as trivial as wearing odd socks or a dirtied smock, they were severely beaten. To the point of being covered in bruises with a belt or a bamboo stick typically, and or they would have their heads dunked into buckets of cold water for long enough to make the kids think they were going to drown. Several former child members would talk later in interviews of how traumatic it was to hear or even watch other kids be beaten or half drowned, screaming, fighting to run away to end their punishment. According to one cult auntie, Margot, the strict rules and regulation were for the aunties just as much as they were for the kids, and had told them that the spiritual path was a brutal one, and that sometimes they would have to do hard things they didn't want to do. Enduring these hardships was just part of the auntie's spiritual training and benefit, not just punishment for misbehaving children. And the little children, also regularly dosed, not just with LSD, but also with Valium and Mogadon, two benzodiazepines that can leave you feeling disoriented and confused, and psilocybin, the active psychoactive substance in magic mushrooms to, quote, keep them in line. Holy shit. Cannot imagine being dosed with fucking LSD or similar substances as a little kid. Reality's already soft, right? It's very soft along the edges when you're a kid. Your brain is so underdeveloped. As soon as they reach their teenage years, the kids would be forced into, quote, clearing sessions, similar to the hallucinogenic rituals the adult members endured, would endure during initiation. This is so fucking crazy. They would be deprived of food and sleep, locked in a dark room for days, dosed with LSD intravenously every couple of hours. Holy MK Ultra. That's some secret government program level of brainwashing. Every time I start to think I've heard it all when it comes to cults, something like this comes along. Just continually amazed by the sheer volume of insane life choices and crazy scenarios that various humans have pulled off on this planet over the years. The truth might not actually be stranger than fiction, but it definitely gives it a run for its money from time to time. While the kids were drugged, Anne would ask them questions like, can you look at why you're so wicked? Why don't you do what you're told? And badger them about creepy shit like sexual desires, and of course remind them that she's Jesus. According to the book The Family, the shocking true story of a notorious cult, again by Chris Johnson and Rosie Jones, a child member named Sarah in her first session, quote, saw her skin falling off. She saw bones and maggots and a corpse. She felt alone in the universe, and she remembers Anne laughing at her and calling her names. So that's fun. Children were given their first clearing session when they were 14, but again, they were often dosed many times before this. Many victims would never truly fully recover from the level of hallucinogens they would consume during these clearing sessions. There's rumors that, some of them ended up institutionalized for the rest of their fucking lives. Yeah, I bet. Given LSD doses every few hours for days. How did Anne rationalize all this? Dr. Raynor Johnson's diary describes Anne's plan in a 1978 entry called Suffer the Little Children to Come Unto Me. He wrote, viewed as a piece of organization with devoted and sacrificial help, it is staggering in its outlook. Yet it was planned with the consciousness of its magnitude and the great responsibility of its undertaking. Only a great master, equally at home in this world and the next, could have hoped to carry it through. It amounted to this. A group of children, some already born here, some yet to be born, were brought together, fostered and adopted and trained from the beginning of their lives in as perfect conditions as could be provided. Their health was meticulously supervised, and all aspects of their welfare and education were considered and provided for. Before they came, it was known by the master when and where and to what parents they were coming and what qualities they potentially brought with them from past lives. It is safe to say that the future age will see them, unknown though they are, as custodians and continuers of the work their master has set going in many parts of the world. I'm not sure that explains how Anne rationalized it. I am sure that Dr. Johnson had lost his fucking mind. He somehow believed the children's living conditions were near perfect and essential to nurture the children required to carry Anne's spiritual work around the world. They needed to have their brains scrambled to properly and totally digest the master's teachings. By the mid-1970s, the family and their crazy teachings had gone global, and Anne expanded the sect into England and America, buying massive overseas properties, including Broome Farm, a big Tudor estate in Kent. In 1977, one of the original cult children, Wayne Callister, who traveled to England with Anne, fled Anne's cult property in England at the age of 17. A child fleeing a spiritual community should have set off alarm bells, but it would be many more years before authorities began to look more closely. As later reported in an article in the September 5th, 1933. We're going to travel back in time. The 1993 edition of the Canberra Times, Wayne was taken from a strict Catholic upbringing in a Queensland foster family and went with his birth mother to live in the family's Ferny Creek compound. He told a reporter about being dosed with all the drugs I've already gone over, said that from time to time children would vanish. The rumor was, he said, they had died from drug overdoses. Wayne said that drugs were the basis of most of the sex teachings, that they were used as a tool of persuasion for clearings and healings. He said that when he was 10 years old, he saw his sect mother for the last time lying comatose on the kitchen floor after ingesting an almost lethal cocktail of various drugs. He wouldn't see her again for 2 decades. A few years before being interviewed for the newspaper, he had tracked her down to a nursing home where she had been living for years, unable to care for herself. She was incapable of communicating with him, totally unaware of her surroundings. Her mind had been destroyed by Anne's experimental drug cocktails. Wayne ended up becoming a social worker so he could look out for kids in the system like he was and do a better job of protecting them than anybody ever did for him. So good on Wayne. Hail Nimrod. February of 1979, Joan Villemick, the woman who ran the New Haven Psychiatric Clinic, died, and she left control of the hospital in her will to none other than Anne Hamilton-Byrne, which is awesome. Doesn't matter that she wasn't a psychiatrist. She's New Jesus. This marked Anne's transition from having spiritual power to direct institutional power. However, around the same time, Anne's control over her kids started to slip, and cult members started to vanish. In 1980, a 10-year-old girl named Kim Halm went missing. For the first time, the Australian media caught wind of the family, which had somehow managed to avoid scrutiny for almost 2 decades. Kim had been born into the family. Her mother, Patricia, had met Anne through evil Satan yoga, naturally, and then on Anne's orders had quit her job as librarian to become a nurse for the cult. But of course. One day, Kim's father, Hans, dropped Kim off at Patricia's house, noticed a suspicious white car parked in the driveway. After Hans and Patricia divorced, Anne had ordered Patricia to leave her husband. Patricia fled with Kim, and Hans filed a missing persons police report. A smart guy, he had written down that suspicious white car's license plate and kept it, and now the police were able to trace it to the cult's Lake Eildon compound, where the kids were held. Police searched the property but could not find Kim, and for some reason didn't seem all that bothered about the dozens of other kids living there, all with the same surname of Hamilton-Byrne, all with the same fucking weird bleach blonde haircuts and old-timey outfits. The whole thing was dismissed as some type of domestic dispute. Fortunately, Kim and Patricia will eventually be found many years later living in Auckland, New Zealand, where they had fled. Before moving forward, former member Fran Parker said she was able to get numerous followers to divorce their spouses, and was, sometimes by threatening them with institutionalization. If they didn't, which we went over before, she would allegedly say, again, it only takes 2 psychiatrists to commit you. And as mentioned earlier, she had more than 2 psychiatrists under her spell willing to do New Jesus' bidding. While Anne did not get in any trouble regarding the Kim Halm runaway situation, the media were now beginning to grow curious about the family, and that made Anne nervous. She needed to make it harder, she felt, for her to get in trouble, so she started to twist reality further, and she started to change members' birthdays, to change relationships between members, even change their names, where they were from. For example, in 1984, the Australian-born Sarah Hamilton-Byrne, later known as Sarah Moore, suddenly became a New Zealander, and was no longer a twin but a triplet, according to newly falsified legal documents. That type of shit became a common ploy of Anne's when taking children now. She'd forge documents claiming that the new children were actually the twin or a triplet of someone who was already in the cult, in addition to making it harder for authorities to find kids taken in by the cult. This was Anne's way of demonstrating power over not just the family, but the entire world of facts. She used this as proof of her ability to alter reality at will. But the rewrites didn't hold for long. Again, the original children, they're getting older, harder to control. And as the horrors wore on, 2 cult children, Sarah Moore and Leanne Crease, finally will have enough. As a teen, Sarah began rebelling, stealing shit like toast and butter from the aunties. This progressed to stealing food from outside the property, encouraging her pseudo-siblings to do the same, leading them on night raids to steal food from neighboring houses. Such a sad form of teenage rebellion, not sneaking out to a party or have sex. No, just sneaking out to get a fucking snack. Then in 1986 came the first escape. 16-year-old Leanne finally snapped. After being violently slapped in the face by Anne, she slapped her back. Well done. Judas had slapped New Jesus, and now she had to escape. She escaped out of a window, bolted down to the lake, ran until she reached a nearby house where she called the police. And for a very brief moment, it looked like Anne Hamilton-Byrne might finally have to face some consequences. When an officer arrived at the neighbor's home, Leanne told him all about the beatings, about the time she'd been beaten with the belt or a bamboo stick, how she had ended up covered in bruises, barely able to move. She spoke of starvation, saying she went a full week without food once before. She spoke of LSD dosing and strange rituals. The woman claiming to be God, but sadly, because the truth was so outrageous, the officer didn't believe her. Instead of rescuing her or checking up on the remaining children, the officer phoned the aunties, who convinced him that, Leanne's crazy. She's mentally unstable. And now Leanne was placed in foster care, and her claims totally ignored. She will struggle to adjust to life in the outside world. It terrified her. She didn't know how to function. She didn't know how to cross a fucking road, how to navigate anything in everyday life. One day, she walked into a bank and asked them to give her $50 to buy some new clothes because she didn't know how banks worked. She had just totally lost. 1987, things at the family shifted when Anne and Bill fled overseas. Worried about being investigated in Australia or having their compounds raided, they went to live in Hawaii first, then over to the UK again. But of course, Anne still controlled things back in Australia. She understood that appearing normal protected the cult, so she decided that some of the older children would be allowed to attend a real high school now. She figured they were so brainwashed and indoctrinated that betrayal was unlikely, but she'd be wrong. While living overseas, Anne adopted a much more lax attitude towards her children, became disinterested in spending much time and energy controlling them, which, is fair. It's got to be exhausting being a controlling cult leader. It's hard work. Why do I have to keep reminding you dipshits I'm new Jesus? Why can't you just do whatever the fuck I say when I say it? I'm so sick of autonomy for other people. She started allowing Sarah and some others to make friends outside the community. Sarah will move to live at Winborough, another one of Anne's properties. She had so many properties. We don't even know how many properties she had. Where she would finish her high school studies. There, Sarah joined a ballroom dance class, made 2 new friends, sisters Kathy and Helen. She would join their family for dinner every now and then, and she began to quietly confide in them and their mother Erica about what life in the family was actually like. And Erica and her daughters were like, "What the fuck? No, I've never dosed my girls with massive amounts of LSD. What? No, we never talk about the second coming and doomsday." Sarah's new friends told her that what she was living through was highly abnormal. And now for the first time, Sarah started to truly understand how fucked up and controlling her upbringing had been. And she began to refer to herself and other kids, in the cult as POAs, or prisoners of Anne. One night after Erica drove Sarah home, Sarah invited Erica inside to see what the compound was really like, so she could show her, I'm not bullshitting. This is how it is. And that was a direct breach of Anne's rules. And the aunties reported it immediately, and Sarah was excommunicated from the cult. New Jesus was like, "Out, bitch! Don't let the compound door hit you on the ass on the way out." Erica fortunately took her in, put a roof over her head, and importantly introduced her to a private investigator named Helen D., who helped Sarah locate her adoption records, which was the first step to figuring out who she actually was. Sarah was terrified to have been excommunicated. She thought she was now cursed to die. Her soul was damned. She thought that, because she had been, of course, taught to think that. But then a bright spot. In the outside world, Sarah will find and reunite with Leanne. And the 2 adopted sisters could not stop talking and thinking about the siblings they had left behind now. They feared for their safety. Anne was set to return to Australia in a couple of months, and they knew exactly what would happen as soon as she arrived. Right, the LSD clearing sessions would start up again. The thought of their younger siblings having to suffer through such a traumatic ordeal made them sick. They went back to the police, provided more statements, including detailed records of abuse at Lake Eildon, and then guided the authorities straight to the property. In the early hours of Friday, August 14th, 1987, the state of Victoria, federal police, or Victoria State Police and federal police, they raided Lake Eildon, responding to what they believed was, somewhat of a standard child abuse case. Bill Byrne was present during the raid and was away. Although he was not charged, Bill resisted the police, clinging tightly to a child, forcing officers to physically wrestle the child from him. Authorities had seen enough to remove the children from the isolated compound and place them into protective custody while they investigated further. Sadly, the youngest child they rescued, exact age not given, suffered from psychosocial dwarfism. Living in such a harsh, uncaring environment had prevented her growth hormones from being released. And upon being rescued from the cult, she immediately started to grow again. The detectives scoured every inch of the property in their investigation. They found coffins buried in sandy graves, sent the bones inside of those coffins off for analysis. They soon realized that a lot of kids were missing. Only knew the whereabouts of 14 of the kids. There were supposedly a bunch more, so where were they? It was now obvious to detectives that there was far more to this case than child abuse allegations. So was this investigation going to bring the cult down? Well, no. 1988, according to Sarah, police informed her and Leanne that, quote, due to the statutory limitation of 12 months from the date of abuse, the authorities were unable to proceed with prosecuting members of the family for what they had done to us. That's fucking crazy. The system had failed them. Luckily, though, just a few months later, a routine call would bring Detective Lex DeMann into the family's orbit. The call was regarding an incident involving Roland Whitaker, a rebellious teenager whose mother, Elizabeth, had a reputation as being one of the cruelest aunties. Roland had attempted to burn down a Catholic primary school in the hills. Roland, then 17, known to the police for a string of arson and petty theft charges in the area. And DeMann set out to investigate the arson further. While he did so, a constable warned him, Roland's one of the kids tied up with that cult. Don't get involved. Strange advice. DeMann would not take it. In 1989, a police operation codenamed Operation Forest would be set up, headed by DeMann, who led a small team of 5 other detectives pulled from the drug squad. Operation Forest Task Force called for a royal commission to fully investigate what appeared to be the acquisition and administration of LSD and other controlled substances to underage minors and systematic failures in government agencies to detect and stop these alleged illegal activities. But tragically, this will never be acted upon. Why? DeMann and his team were very strapped for manpower and resources, tragically underfunded. And adult sect members, all of them currently in the compounds, flat out refused to talk poorly about their leader. They would not incriminate her. The police's only hope of prosecution lay with talking to the kids. And in January of 1990, detectives began to interview children from Lake Eildon, but it didn't go smoothly. There were endless hiccups. Due to, again, a lack of resources, detectives were not able to travel very far to conduct their interviews. Also, the kids had been conditioned to distrust police heavily. They believed the police were there to hurt them, that they were evil, totalitarian thugs, always on the lookout for small children to abuse, to incarcerate. They also had no frame of reference to understand that the treatment they were receiving was actually abuse. As a result, the kids also remained loyal to Anne. They didn't want to betray their God or their parents, no matter how much pain they were in. Still, authorities kept trying. Lex DeMann and other Operation Forest Task Force members began to grow close to several of the kids. Their trauma deeply affected the investigators, who felt helpless in getting them the justice they needed and deserved. Out of sheer frustration, some task members leaked documents related to a lack of proper police funding to the press to escalate matters. And now politician Robert McKellen, a member of the Victorian Legislative Assembly, demanded to know why no charges had been laid out for what he described as illegal medical experimentation, similar to what went on in World War II in Nazi Germany. But still, the investigation doesn't really move forward. Despite governmental pressure for answers, there was also pressure from within the police to stop the investigation due to what appears to have been corruption. It seems Anne likely used some of her wealth to bribe people in high places, including within law enforcement, that crafty bitch. Supervisors told the task force to just give it up. 2 members would walk away because the stress of all this was taking too great a toll on them. But Lex DeMann would not quit, and soon investigative journalist Marie Moore joined his hunt for answers, and she began tracking down senior members of the cult. During her investigation, Marie also started to bond with the cult children and slowly earn their trust. But then there was another problem with the investigation. No one could find the leaders. DeMann was told Anne and Bill were in the UK, then later that they were in the US, maybe New Zealand, and within the US, maybe New York, maybe Hawaii. Meanwhile, investigators, along with lead prosecutor Carolyn Douglas, continued to pour over massive amounts of material trying to see if there was absolutely anything they could use to charge some of the sect members with something connected to abuse that would stick. But they were finding it impossible. There was no sufficient evidence outside of the testimony of a few exiled members. There was nothing in writing, no photographs of bruises, no hospital reports, no police reports. They couldn't actually find stores of LSD or any other drugs. And another obstacle stood in the way of prosecution. After the initial raid, the children had been housed together instead of being separated for questioning. And prosecutors feared that Anne and Bill's highly paid defense lawyers could then attack any testimony those kids gave as being contaminated. Right? They had a chance to collude. There were also psychological considerations. The children risked being branded as liars by the defense team in court, forcing the children to testify and be cross-examined or relive abuse, risked severe re-traumatization. Finally, if prosecutors couldn't go after the child abuse directly, they decided to turn to something else. How Anne obtained the kids in the first place. They knew there was a lot of dishonesty in that area, so they shifted their focus to trying to prove it. And they'll get a lucky break. Lex DeMann heard that a man named Peter Kibbe had recently left the cult. Kibbe had been the sex lawyer and had handled property transactions and documentation for births, adoptions, and identities. He had a lot of intel regarding the cult's inner workings. He was the key to unlocking the cult's illegal activities. Police already had birth documents proving that the kids were born in Victoria, but former member Sarah Moore had suddenly become a New Zealander, a move made possible because Anne, with the help of Kibbe, had falsified her documents. At least that's what the police suspected and wanted to prove. Lex DeMann and Kibbe had Kibbe arrested, on fraud charges for producing a false statutory declaration now. For a lawyer, this charge could have resulted in Kibbe losing his ability to legally practice law in Australia. Would he turn on his former messiah to get this charge dropped? Lex DeMann thought he might, in large part because Kibbe had a condition that made the thought of living behind bars, inconceivable to him, a lot harder than it would be for most, OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder. Showering, for instance, could sometimes take the man hours when his OCD was especially active. Right? He might go through 3 or 4 bars of soap in one shower. After his arrest, Kibbe quickly made bail and then surprised the police by calling them. Turns out Peter Kibbe was furious about how his life had turned out, and he was out for blood. No need to rely on that OCD. He told police, quote, "I have information about Anne that might help with proceedings." Over the course of the next 4 months, Kibbe slowly opened up more and more. I'm sure he was worried about incriminating himself, showing detectives how he and Anne together forged various birth certificates. Now Lex DeMann had the first tangible piece of evidence to arrest Anne and Bill Hamilton-Byrne. While he could only pursue them on a minor charge, conspiracy and perjury for falsifying birth certificates, it would at least be enough to bring them back to Australia for prosecution. But still had to find them. Lex was not 100% certain where the fuck they were, but he knew they were currently splitting their time between the UK and the US. Anne used a telephone as a way to maintain control over the cult from abroad. Before the raid, she would sometimes call the aunties from overseas and ask them to administer beatings over the phone so she could listen. That sick fuck wanted to hear the kids screaming. Now that she knew the police were after her, she was far more careful about when and who she called. Lex DeMann sought the help of the FBI, Interpol, Scotland Yard to help track her down. Police briefly even pondered trying to infiltrate the cult by sending in an undercover officer, but they instead hoped that surveillance might be enough. But that was going to take a while. Anne and Bill owned sect properties all over the world they could bounce to and fro from. By this time, Anne was worth an estimated $50 million US, with some sources saying her net worth could have been as high as $150 million through property, land, and cash donated by followers. Holy shit. Over in the U.S., FBI agent specialist Hilda Kogut was assigned to this case, one of many agents from various countries. Kogut worked out of the FBI's New York field offices, operating from a satellite station in Orange County, New York, and specialized in violent crime, armed robberies, and kidnappings. And on May 27th, 1993, Sarah Moore, who was living in Melbourne and studying medicine at the University of Melbourne, received an important phone call. It was Anne. It was Mommy. They were still in touch despite Anne having kicked her out of the cult. Anne rarely called, but today she had a bone to pick. Some cult members had turned on her, some more cult members. And during the conversation, Anne let it slip that she was in America. Sarah immediately called Operation Forest, who reached out to the FBI. At this point, they'd been on standby for months. Before she could make a move, Hilda needed to confirm Anne and Bill actually were at their house in Hurleyville, a hamlet in Sullivan County, known for its secluded properties. That's where Sarah thought she was. When Hilda arrived at the address, she found an isolated home on a country road. It's problematic because it didn't offer any good hidden spots where she could surveil the property without being seen. So she got creative. She recruited help from a local post office employee, rode along with the postal driver on their daily route, quietly surveying the home. And sure enough, FBI agent Hilda Kogut saw that Anne and Bill were there, and she let Operation Forest know. And now, Lex DeMann flies to America to escort the Hamilton-Byrnes back to Australia. June 4th, 1993, at the crack of dawn, Hilda Kogut and the FBI squad arrive at Anne and Bill's home, knock on the door, yelling, "Open up, we have a warrant." Bill opened the door almost immediately. Several moments later, Anne appeared in the living room, wearing a robe, looking like she just stepped out of the shower. What Hilda found surprised her. Anne looked nothing like the ruthless cult leader she'd expected. She looked frail and old. According to Hilda, Anne, quote, looked like a woman that had had a lot of reconstructive surgery. I love this part. Including a hairline that pretty much started in the middle of her head. That's how many facelifts she'd had. Oh my God, I love that description. A hairline that pretty much started in the middle of her head. And she's not wrong. There are videos and photos online of New Jesus back in 1993 when she was arrested. And the 71-year-old cult leader does indeed look, at this point in time, like her hairline starts at the very top of her head. It is something. Her middle-aged good looks have 100% left the building at this point. She looks like a fucking witch now. Her husband, Billy, he's looking a little cray-cray himself in 93. The handsome power couple now looking like, crazed cultists. Like something out of a horror movie. Anne and Bill are charged with perjury and conspiracy to defraud. Their first court appearance post-arrest is in White Plains Court in New York, where Anne and Bill are granted bail, but they're ordered to wear electronic ankle bracelets to have their movements monitored. Anne sent a letter to her followers around this time, writing some culty shit. The invisible forces are guiding us and leading us on, my friends. It is also important for you to know that it has been revealed certain tests in which we have failed. So this has given renewed trust and confidence because it showed a lot of people that despite apparent failure, all this stuff that has gone on with the Hamilton-Byrne kids by maintaining a steadfast mind and keeping our face turned toward that wondrous light. Fucking no idea what that means. Maybe stay strong? Don't rat on your Messiah? I don't know. 4 days after the arrest, around 50 cult members in Melbourne met up at the old Shantini Katan Lodge for an emergency meeting to talk about how to defuse this crisis. That lodge is still around, by the way. Abandoned, but still around. I found a YouTube video of two guys who broke in and wandered around. It is creepy. Definitely could be used as a set in a movie about cults. Their lawyers fought tooth and nail to block extradition, insisting Anne's weak heart and Bill's kidney stones made them far too sick to fly back to Australia. Kidney stones? He can't fly because of fucking kidney stones? And New Jesus' heart is too weak to fly? Isn't it supposed to be strong enough to survive an apocalypse? They simply could not and would not survive the stress, their lawyers said. However, when a doctor assessed them, they were found to be in perfectly good health. Of course they were. Anne and Bill kept fighting extradition, though. But then while Bill was being held in the Westchester County Jail in New York, one of his cellmates got straight up murdered. And then Bill was like, I'll go. I'm over it. No, I'll go. I'll leave. And also, they were just being pursued on minor charges. So Anne and Bill are now extradited to Australia from the U.S. Their trial is set for November of 1993, but they are still only charged with minor offenses. Charging Bill and Anne with the full extent of their heinous crimes at the moment was not possible because of the principle of specialty in international extraditions in Australia at that time, which stated that an extradited person could not be sentenced, detained, re-extradited, or charged for any offense other than the one for which extradition was granted. So that little loophole, worked out well for them. Cult membership was at least plummeting now, though. There was little chance of recruiting new cult members now that Anne and Bill had been arrested, and newspapers and tabloids were labeling them as dangerous cult leaders on a nearly daily basis, and they look crazy as fuck. I think they lost a lot of their members this time, too. Anne and Bill will each plead not guilty to one count each of conspiring to commit perjury and one count each of conspiring to defraud. But they will both be found guilty of both charges. Sadly, during sentencing, their ages are taken into account, though. Anne and Bill, both in their early 70s, and the judges noted they had already spent 3 months in jail in America. So therefore, Anne, nearly 73, Bill, 72, will not serve further jail time, and that is fucking weak. Their only punishment is a $5,000 fine each for falsifying documents of 3 children. The maximum penalty for those offenses was $60,000 and 5 years in jail. It's a fucking candy-ass judge. 8 aunties are arrested, charged with making false Social Security claims and collecting government benefits they were not entitled to. Anne had instructed them to claim sickness benefits, invalid benefits, and aged pensions while working as nurses, and then they would send their checks straight to her. The aunties appealed, but their appeals failed. All but one will serve short jail sentences around 6 weeks each, and they'll live out the rest of their lives as free women. Following Anne and Bill's arrest, along with intense media coverage and public outrage, one might expect to see the cult members, see the truth and get out, but that didn't really happen for a while. Most actually stayed. The kids left, though. Anne, they were taken during that raid, so that's good. Anne continued to insist that their actions were a genuinely benevolent act, that she and Bill, out of the goodness of their hearts, had rescued and taken in a bunch of handicapped kids. Anne's version of the family story was this. While teaching yoga and working at New Haven in the early 60s, quote, some rather important people approached New Haven matron Joan Villemick with several handicapped children in need of a loving family. Anne arranged adoptions within her yoga community out of the goodness of her heart, out of the goodness of her satanic, bendy, tight leggings. She denied ever using LSD on anyone, denied ever claiming to be Jesus, insisted the only reason for using fake passports that she had was to make, getting through customs easier. According to Anne, the whole thing was, quote, just so sad. We all thought, not just myself, we had the best advice from psychologists and welfare workers to let them feel that they were part of our home. Anne maintained that her controversial methods were driven by a genuine desire to help troubled kids who were beyond repair, and she had their best interests at heart. After her trial, Anne returned to preaching sermons at the lodge, but at least while she previously spoke to hundreds, now post-arrest, there would never be more than 20 members at a time. In early 1995, Megan Dawes, the daughter of 2 cult members, sat for an interview about all this. She surprisingly praised the family. She defended Anne and Bill, insisting that, quote, the children who alleged imprisonment and abuse were led into false memory syndrome by psychologists after the raid. Not a bad thing to believe, but I don't think true. Could have happened, but I don't think it did. For Megan, the horrors reported by former members were simply distortions. Another steadfast supporter was Michael Stevenson Helmer, nephew of former Australian Governor General Sir Zelman Cohen. He maintained just until the end that Anne was persecuted and oppressed solely on religious grounds. In 2009, at 87 years old, Anne agreed to an interview, the only one I can find online, with Australian TV host Carl Stefanovic, who seems to be a gem of a human, by the way. I've watched various interviews he has done over the years. He's fantastic. Anyway, during the interview, Stefanovic read aloud a passage from Sarah Hamilton-Byrne's 1995 memoir, Unseen, Unheard, Unknown, regarding being abused. Anne simply denied the abuse, saying, kids can make things up. We've all been kids. He read a passage, or the passage he read said, Anne had a stiletto-heeled shoe in her hand and she started hitting me. A stiletto-heeled shoe. On my bare backside with the shoe, after about 20 or 30 hits, she got tired and Bill took over. Anne got really fucking weird during this interview. Her cult persona came out. Check out this awesomely awkward exchange between Carl and Anne. This is on 60 Minutes Australia. Carl has asked Anne how she feels about Sarah having attempted suicide. And this is how it goes.
Does it hurt you that she has tried to take her own life because of the way she was brought up?
Of course it does. It's not the way she was brought up. It's the way it handled, the way it went out. We didn't have everything that we needed. We had most things. I bought the bigger house because of the likes of little Sarah.
You thought a house would make everything right?
Well, I just thought it would give them more room.
People don't try and take their life because their house is too small.
You're not smart enough.
For what?
In your heart. What's in your heart is not the same.
Well, I don't know what you mean by that.
No, of course you don't.
He just switches gears after that and asks her a new question. That's such a fantastic exchange. I want to use that on somebody in conversation. Just out of nowhere. And she leans forward really intensely while she does it. Just lean forward out of nowhere and be like, you're not smart enough. What? For what? In your heart. What's in your heart is not the same. I don't know. I don't know what you mean by that. No, of course you don't. Carl gives the best. What the fuck is she going on about? Look into the camera during that exchange. We gotta hear the last part of that exchange one more time when she leans forward and speaks her crazy.
You're not smart enough.
For what?
In your heart. What's in your heart is not the same.
Well, I don't know what you mean by that.
No, of course you don't.
I wish there was more just interviews with cult leaders after their fall on that I can find on YouTube, just in general. It's always so great when they've been in a cult for a long time and they've had all these, followers just accept whatever nonsense they say as divine truth. And in that weird little echo chamber, they get so much stranger. And then when you take them out of that and they speak to a regular person, it's just fucking gibberish. Oh, it's so good. Following Anne's trial, Lex DeMann, after the Operation Task Force had compiled a 30,000-page dossier on Anne's alleged activities, he concluded that, quote, I have dealt with Hell's Angels. I've dealt with a lot of bad crooks. She was the worst. She was evil. He'll spend the rest of his career lamenting not being able to put her in prison. In the years following the raid and arrest, the aftermath was devastating, of course, for many former members. One of Peter and Barbara Kibbe's sons attempted suicide at 16, then succeeded at 20. Their other son has no memory of anything that happened to him before the age of 7. And Barbara believes that's because of the cult and what happened to him at the kids' center in Uptop near Lake Eildon. Both the Kibbe boys had grown up at Uptop. Anne had sent Barbara Kibbe, Peter Kibbe's wife, away to England for over a year, telling her, "I'll look after your sons, leave them with me," and Barbara agreed. And when she returned, both her boys were deeply fucked up. Sarah Moore, the cult's first child, the runaway hero who saved her siblings, went on to become a doctor, but her life far from easy, filled with pain, trauma, and depression. In 2005, she was charged with forging prescriptions for pethidine for herself. She claimed she sought relief with the painkiller for pain caused by an incision made in her abdomen during some weird initiation cult ritual. At her hearing, Magistrate Nunzio La Rosa spared her a conviction and jail time, taking into account the deprived and abusive life she had endured growing up in Anne Hamilton-Byrne's cult. She attempted suicide in 2008, spent the remainder of her short life in a wheelchair, before passing away from heart failure in 2016 at just 46. As for the graves at Uptop, I mentioned earlier the missing people. Turns out the graves were actually for dead dogs. Dead pets. Regarding the missing cult members, some did die from drug overdoses, while others were committed to institutions like New Haven. For the surviving cult children, a whole new wave of trauma awaited them. Many went out to search for the truth about who they really were, only to discover that nobody knew. Their so-called parents within the sect were not their biological parents. For many, there was no record of their births in any official registry. Anne, of course, wasn't their actual mom. Bill wasn't their dad. After years of identity searching and trauma, Roland Whitaker, now going by his real name of Adam Lancaster, finally reunited with his biological family, only to learn his mom had already passed away. He will say, "There's a huge sadness that I actually never got to at least give her a cuddle or say, 'Hey, I'm your son.'" Upon being rescued from the cult, victim Anna Trina Byrne, who discovered she'd been sold to the cult, found out her mother had committed suicide and, quote, or died by suicide. And quote, not only was Bill not her father, but he was actually her grandfather. His son Michael was her real father. Despite everything she endured, Leanne Crease puzzled many in Australia, shocked her cult siblings when she asked Bill to walk her down the aisle at her wedding. As she explained in the Cult of the Family docuseries, she'd always been a daddy's girl and held no ill will toward Bill. Her rage directed entirely at Anne. So she was obviously still psychologically fucked up. Bill died in 2001, and you know what? Good. Fuck that guy. Unrepentant to the bitter end, Anne continued to lead the cult, what was left of it. In 2004, she was admitted to a care home with dementia, where she lived out her final years as still technically a cult leader with a few followers and a millionaire. On April 29th, 2017, the long-running American investigative journalism series, Another 48 Hours, did an episode on the family. In it, they interviewed numerous former cult members, most of whom we've already talked about. Adam Lancaster explained that while Anne herself was high on LSD, she had this vision that she had to collect all these kids from birth. Yeah, everyone was taking it, Anne included. He and Dave Whitaker, whose parents were senior cult members, said she told followers that she needed to collect the children because the end of the world was coming. Most of the population of the world was going to perish. Quote, she was preparing us to re-educate the world, what was left of it. Former member Sarah, shortly before she died, when asked why Anne started collecting a bunch of kids, said, "I think she simply said about it as a project. I'll collect as many kids as I can. Once she became the leader of the cult, I think she could get whatever she wanted. I think one thing she wanted was lots of little children. Perfect little children in perfect little dresses with perfect little blonde hair." Yeah, it's kind of like she collected kids like like my wife Lindsay now just collects like Sunny Angels. Like they were just fucking dolls for her. Former child member Ben Shenton said that he grew up in fear in the cult due to the abuse dished out by the aunties. Quote, if someone wet the bed, they'd get cold showers. One of the boys had asthma. He was wheezing and sniveling, and the nurses put him outside in the cold at night. Detective Lex DeMann said in his interview for Another 48 Hours that he still often breaks down and cries when he thinks of the kids, and he ended the episode by saying, "Some might find this a bit harsh of me to say, but to me, it will be a great day when they bury that bitch 6 feet under." 2 years later, I love that quote, the man got his great day. June 13th, 2019, Anne Hamilton-Byrne finally died at the age of 98. That wretched old bitch almost made it to 100. All that devil yoga stretched out her longevity, I guess. By the time of her death, the family had dwindled to a tiny band of loyal followers. Few hung on till the very end, like I said. Few were willing to speak to the press except for Michael Stevenson Helmer. He visited Anne regularly in her aged care home, denied she had dementia at the end, insisting instead that she lived in, quote, Christ consciousness. That dude's mind was just fucking mush. He would often speak out about Anne's magnetism to the media right up until she died. saying she just radiated out. Don't you know that? Haven't you experienced that? Dude, that's the acid talking, Michael. Too much. Michael also took to the media to challenge a memoir Sarah Moore wrote, insisting that there was an awful lot of goodness that went on there too that's never mentioned by those dear children who are victims and will remain victims until the day they die. They never mention the good times, do they? According to Michael, Anne had once personally helped the Dalai Lama escape to India to avoid Chinese persecution. She's such a good person. But that never happened. Anne's only biological daughter, Judith, later known as Natasha, moved to the to the UK to start a new life. No longer involved with the family, she became estranged from her mom long before New Jesus died. Anne's only biological granddaughter, Rebecca, participated in the Cult of the Family docuseries. As of 2019, she was still grappling with the weight of her grandmother's legacy, trying to understand whether her grandmother had meant to do what she did. She did, Becky. She did. Your Nana was a piece of shit. Only your emotional connection to her is keeping you from seeing that. The leader of the family cult was a fucking monster who destroyed families and people's minds. Some still speculate, though, that Anne was not a monster, that she, suffered from schizophrenia. That's why she did what she did. Others propose she was just a woman too broken by a troubled childhood and a warped vision of motherhood that drove her to violate every fundamental norm of what it means to be a mother, to love, nurture, protect, and be selfless, but get the fuck out of here. So many people struggle with schizophrenia. So many people have troubled childhoods. Almost none of them do what she did. Not going to give her a pass. At least one psychologist who reviewed the family case ultimately concluded Anne Hamilton-Byrne was a true psychopath. Bingo. Let's get out of this timeline.
Good job, soldier. You made it back. Barely.
Before sharing some final thoughts, I have another quick sponsor for you. Today's Timesuck is brought to you by Beelzebub's Hot as Hell Hot Yoga Studio. Hello, fellow seeker, fellow stretcher, fellow astral traveler. How are your chakras? How's your aura? What vibrational frequency are you operating at these days? How tight are your hamstrings? What about your rotator cuffs? Are they stiff and achy? How about your soul? Do you still have one? Are you willing to give it to me for everlasting, very flexible, relaxing, hard-bodied life? Here at Beelzebub's Hot as Hell Hot Yoga Studio, where we always keep the temperature hot as hell, we're running a special. Give us your soul for free classes for life. One soul equals unlimited classes. And not just that, but also access to unlimited demons, unlimited telepathy, teleportation, clairvoyance, unlimited astral realm travel and levitation, unlimited access to Atlantis and Lemuria, unlimited access to hell. Come on into Beelzebub's Hot as Hell Hot Yoga Studio, located at the corner of Malarkey Street and West Winnemucca Boulevard, a block away from the Winners Hotel and Casino in Winnemucca, Nevada, birthplace of Richard Byrd, the notorious Las Vegas Strip Strangler. Your first session will be free. Come for the locust pose. Stay for eternity. Can't hit the eagle pose? Let one of our in-studio demons help you. Beelzebub's Hot as Hell Hot Yoga Studio. You only have one soul, so sell it well. That's a weird sponsor. We've had a lot of weird sponsors, but I feel like that one was pretty weird even for this show. Perfect for a weird episode. Such a strange story, right? Such a strange story. Anne Hamilton-Byrne and the family cult. Yoga, theosophy, claim of being the second coming of Jesus, kidnapped children, extreme devotion to a cult leader aided by bizarre rituals incorporating what sounds like a massive amount of LSD, enough to keep people tripping hard for days. Cult members, many of them young children, tripping their asses off while being brainwashed. A cult that would have never gotten off the ground if a distinguished college professor, an author, and an entire psychiatric facility had not gotten on board with this. Multiple highly educated, successful people truly believed that a 40-ish-year-old yoga-instructing, plastic surgery-loving single mom was a god who could perform miracles and see the future. And they use their positions, sometimes in downright evil ways, to help convince others, mainly affluent women taking yoga classes, that they needed to say goodbye to their old lives, including their husbands oftentimes, give all their money to New Jesus, and join the crazy world inside a world she had built by largely plagiarizing the lunatic teachings of other wackadoodles who had come before her like Madame Blavatsky. Anne made tens of millions of dollars with this grift, and she was barely punished. She died a multimillionaire at the age of almost 100. Pulled that shit off for over half a century. It would be inspiring if it wasn't so evil. A single mom who was once an abandoned, impoverished child completely transformed herself after her husband tragically died on the way to pick up their adopted child. She changed her appearance and her name, created and followed through with a business plan that allowed her to buy and live in lavish homes all around the world. That's one way to look at what she did. Another is a damaged, grieving, broken, manipulative, narcissistic psychopath stops at nothing, is willing to destroy families, childhoods, and people's minds, driving several to suicide, leaving several others unable to live outside of psychiatric facilities, their minds permanently fucked, all so she could live out some weird, demented version of the perfect family and live in wealth and privilege and be worshipped as a god. Let's head to today's takeaways.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
Number 1, Anne Hamilton-Byrne and her aunties abused their adopted, stolen, and biological children so consistently that at least one failed to grow properly due to the excessive stress they were placed under. Number 2, Anne and the family cult used LSD to help brainwash both adults and children into believing that Anne was Jesus Christ reborn. Number 3, Anne claimed that the primary purpose of the family was to build a super race of Victorian children, elevated humans who would be able to survive a coming apocalypse and keep new Jesus' messages alive in the new post-apocalyptic age. I think. Number 4, Australia's forced adoption scandal was a dark stain in the nation's history. Hundreds of thousands of Australian children placed into state institutions in the early and mid-20th century were physically, psychologically, and/or sexually abused in a broken system where single mothers were routinely exploited. Anne knew about that system. She had been a child inside it herself at one point, and she knew how to exploit it and did. Number 5, new info. The Shantini-Katan Park Association, SPA, one of the last remaining organizations connected to the family, gave away one of its last major properties, Shantini-Katan Lodge, to the Tibetan community in Canberra in 2021. The community accepted it, but the decision caused a lot of controversy considering the family's ties to child abuse, drugs, and terror. It seems like there's like a handful of people still alive who are technically still in this cult. That's hard to figure out. Anyway, within just a few years, after never actually using this compound, it seems, the community decided to sell it. And in May of this year, the 7.7-acre property located at 35 Belgrave Ferny Creek Road in Ferny Creek, Australia, was listed for sale at 1.65 million Australian dollars. This is the property I watched those YouTubers trespass into and explore. The property has a gated tree-lined driveway, opens up to a brick building with 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, plus several large open rooms where Anne used to give her sermons in a car park. Could you handle living there, knowing what went on there? Could you handle dropping acid there? I feel like that place might lend itself to an especially bad trip. You know, one where Anne, at least in your mind, makes a very unwanted cameo.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
The Family, Australia's most notorious cult, has been sucked. Thanks to the Bad Magic Productions team for all their help in making Timesuck again. Thanks to Queen of Bad Magic, Lindsay Cummins, always giving me the space to work on these. Thanks to Logan Keith, the old art warlock, helping to publish this episode and designing merch for the store at badmagicproductions.com. Thank you to Laura Woods, new researcher and an Australian also, which makes sense for this topic. Did a great job with the initial research. Also, thanks to the All Seen Eyes, moderating the Cult of the Curious private Facebook page, the Mod Squad making sure Discord runs smooth, and everybody over on the Timesuck and Bad Magic subreddits. And now let's head on over to this week's Timesucker updates.
Updates? Get your Timesucker updates.
Today's first update from those sent in to Bojangles at timesuckpodcast.com comes from a sex maniac. M. I've slightly altered his name. His name's not actually M, or maybe it is. Who wrote him with a subject line of addiction awareness. Hi, Dan. I wanted to thank you for sucking addiction. As a recovering addict, it was nice to hear that I'm not alone and that meat sacks have been struggling with addiction for centuries. At the beginning of the podcast, you briefly mentioned sexual and porn addiction. Well, I appreciate you acknowledging that it is, in fact, an addiction, something that I struggle with and am recovering from. Not many people think you can be addicted to sex or porn, including the American Psychiatric Association. Yeah, they have not labeled that as a true addiction. I'll admit at first, I did not believe it either. Like all teenage boys, I'd watch porn on occasion, but I started using heavily in 2019 after a rough breakup. I began traveling for work shortly after, and then the pandemic hit. I was fortunate enough during the pandemic that my job as a geologist for an engineering firm meant that I was an essential employee and was able to work full-time throughout the pandemic, but those factors combined to really accelerate my porn use. I was using it as a way to cope with the feeling of loneliness and isolation while stuck on the road away from home, locked up in a hotel room when I wasn't working. I began looking at porn for hours a day, every time I got the chance. During my commute to work, anytime I got a break at work, my commute back to the hotel/home, and after work until I went to bed, only stopping to eat and shower. At a certain point, it got so bad that the free stuff wasn't enough. I began using pay sites like OnlyFans and spending hundreds of dollars each month seeking out prostitutes in every city I visited. I was never able to go through with them and actually meet, though. I was single. I thought I was living my best life. I wasn't hurting anybody or myself, or so I thought. But I couldn't go to sleep without looking at porn. I still told myself that I didn't have a problem, that I could stop at any time. This pattern of behavior continued for several years. I met my now wife in 2022, and things were great. We had a couple problems here and there, but nothing crazy. But about a year in, things came crashing down and my porn use and associated behavior came to light. My wonderful wife, again, girlfriend at the time, was gracious enough not to leave me, but I didn't try to get better. I just tried to hide it better. I put on an act. I pretended I was getting help. Made her believe that I was changing. We got married in October of 2024, had a month of post-wedding bliss before everything crashed down again. They say that an addict will not change until they've hit their lowest point. Well, I finally hit it. I began reading more into what porn addiction is, what it looks like, how it affects the brain. Much like drugs, viewing porn releases an abnormally high amount of dopamine in the brain. Over time, heavy porn use creates new neurological links in the brain between happiness and porn, causing erratic behavior, loss of impulse control, impaired decision-making skills, and impairing one's ability to regulate emotions, making the addict susceptible to depression and anxiety. Heavy porn is thought to be linked to erectile dysfunction in men as well by desensitizing the human brain, creating highly reactive neural circuits, making porn more rewarding than actual human sexual encounters. Some studies have linked heavy porn consumption to a reduction in gray matter in the brain as well, but that's a newer theory and needs more research. Porn alters one's concept of reality, aids in a misogynistic mindset that women are little more than sexual objects to please men, instead of seeing them as actual human beings with their own feelings and desires. I am now on a path of recovery. I have weekly therapy sessions to address underlying issues that may have led to my addiction. I've sought psychiatric help to address my anxiety and depression. I've joined a men's group called the Samson Society, which is a Christian-based support group for men struggling with porn and sex addiction, and I've been sober for over a year now. But the road to recovery is difficult. In today's society where everything is sexualized, triggers are everywhere. Simple things I used to take for granted, like scrolling through social media, watching TV, playing games on my phone can be triggering. I'm not sorry for the long email. I want to spread awareness of this form of addiction to hopefully prevent others from following myself and many others down a painful, difficult path. Thanks, Dan, for covering addiction, bringing awareness to the struggles that addicts and their families go through. 3 out of 5 stars, wouldn't change a thing. Your loyal meat sack, M. Well, damn, M. Thank you for sharing this very personal struggle of yours and just being so informational in how you presented that email, presented your addiction. I've never been truly addicted to porn, but I have taken breaks from it for sure. When I felt like I've been more interested in porn than actual intimacy. I do think it's very dangerous. I don't have moral judgments about people making it as long as it's consensual and they're, of adult age and no one's being fucking exploited and mistreated. It's a whole other thing I've talked about in previous episodes. But it can definitely start to feel like it's warping your perception of reality. It definitely can. Sex is such a powerful biological urge in many, if not most of us. It's always there lurking in the background already. And it makes sense that porn, gives it almost like the equivalent of a dangerous adrenaline shot. And it takes our sexual urges to a very dangerous, compulsive, very, very just damaging level. So good on you for recognizing that you truly have a problem, that it was giving you more pain than pleasure, ironically, and that you needed to stay away from it, I'm guessing to save your marriage and just kind of, save yourself. And yeah, addiction can take so many forms, and it can create so many different kinds of damage. I figured there would be a lot of these kind of emails, and there have been. Here's another addiction-related email sent in from an anonymous sack with the subject line of, "Great podcast on addiction. Can we get a shout-out for Al-Anon?" Hi, Dan. I'm a big fan of your podcast. Really appreciate your latest episode on addiction. One thing you didn't mention when talking about AA and 12-step programs is Al-Anon Family Groups, a.k.a. AFG, more commonly just Al-Anon. Al-Anon is a support group for people who've been affected by another person's drinking. The format of Al-Anon is basically the same as AA. You work all the same steps, admitting you are powerless over another person's alcoholism and trying to find spiritual healing from the trauma of being around another person's alcoholism. Obviously, this is not necessarily a program targeted at a person who is addicted to a substance, but rather for the people around them who also suffer. So I understand why you didn't mention it. I'm hoping you'll give it a shout out now in case you have any listeners who, like me, have had to deal with another person's alcoholism. I don't want to give my name or too many details about my situation because there's still a lot of stigma around this topic. However, I will say I was living with my husband's spiraling alcohol addiction for a little over a year. He'd always drank heavily. Then at one point, it just devolved into a much more serious problem. I alternated between screaming at him or behaving passively aggressively towards him because I thought I could somehow force him to stop drinking. My anxiety was high every night when he drank. I would listen with dread to the cracking sound of opening cans of alcohol in the next room. When I finally came to Al-Anon, I met so many people who had been in similar situations, and I learned there was nothing I could do to control his behavior, only my own. Al-Anon is truly a fellowship of support, excuse me, and I don't know how I'd be functioning right now if I didn't have it in my life. My husband and I are currently separated, have very limited contact due to actions he has taken while drinking. I've been a single mom to an infant and a toddler for the last 6 months, but I'm doing all right. Anyway, if there's anyone who listens to your podcast who might be in a similar situation and have no idea what they should do to get help, I hope they hear this. Best, Anonymous. Yeah, thank you very much, Anonymous, for another powerful email, very deeply personal email. Good on you for making what had to have been an extremely difficult decision to separate, but a necessary one to protect you and your babies. That shows you have some serious strength. Yes, I'm familiar with Al-Anon, and I'm glad you wrote in about it. Addicts are not the only people hurt by addiction, so are the people around them. Therefore, it only makes sense that when it comes to recovery, addicts aren't the only ones who need support. So, so do the people negatively affected by their addiction. I've heard nothing but good things about Al-Anon, and I hope it continues to help you through this very difficult time. Stay strong, Mama Bear. You are a true boss bitch. I have so much admiration for strong mothers. Strong mothers raise amazing humans, and I wish you nothing but the best. And now one more. So many great messages have come in over the past few weeks, and I'll be sharing more of these soon. This is not about addiction. This is a sweet, funny sack Cody Allen, who wrote in a message or sent in a message with a very attention-grabbing subject line of comedian Dan Cummins and Hunter Biden spotted doing adrenochrome in the stall called Old Glory. That's amazing. He wrote, "Did it work? It's the most absurd headline I could think of. If you're reading this right now, I'm truly grateful. Let's travel back to 2017. Gearing up for a long weekend. 5 shows plus a New Year's comedy extravaganza hosted by who? The highly exalted Sir Sucks-a-Lot himself, but I wasn't aware yet. What I thought at the time was, who the fuck is Dan Cummins? Will he be funny enough for 6 shows? Sorry, Dan, but let's be real. That's a heavy weekend. If you haven't put it together yet, it was New Year's 2017 at Comedy Works South in Denver. I was one of the door staff. Long story short, Thursday night, Dan's doing his thing, had the crowd hooked. Then it happened, a joke to set the tone for the weekend. Still one of my favorite bits to this day. Have a guess. Here come the spoons, motherfucker. I remember physically laughing out loud, the radio buzzing like a what the fuck hotline. The staff was raving about how hard the joke killed, and for 5 more shows, it never got old. Oh man, that's so nice. Thanks. I do remember that weekend, actually. This was also the weekend I was introduced to Timesuck, listened to my first episodes that Friday night. Hooked like Peter Pan's nemesis, I was a Timesuck junkie. That was my live introduction to the King of the Suck, and I've loved the journey since. In hundreds of episodes, I sit silently, shedding tears, listening to how this community changes people's lives, from the giving tree, monthly donations, all the no bullshit Whipple-driven advice Dan hands out. I feel the love and connectivity between meat sacks that gives me some kind of faith in humanity, and hail Nimrod. So here are my spoons. I need help, and I don't feel good asking. I'm creeping up on 40, and my teeth are fucked. I never had my wisdom teeth removed, and they grew impacted in my jaw, causing molars to be bombed out like Baghdad. In the last 2 years, my molars have broken off, leaving the impacted teeth exposed. Yeah, I saw the pictures. Damn. I have holes in teeth that need root canals, teeth that grew crooked because of the pressure. Now with broken teeth, I'm in constant pain, everything's sensitive. I'm mostly stuck to sucking soft noodles. Trying to get work done, but damn it, Dan, dentists demand dollars, dictating different decisions during demanding destinies. How was that random alliteration? No, that was good. It was a fun way of saying, whenever I save up to get something done, life happens. The last time I had insurance, I got a treatment plan started. It was about $10,000. Now without insurance, worsening conditions, looking more like $15K out of pocket. I'm not writing for monetary donations. It is the holiday season. There are families in need. I'm pleading to the Timesuck community for 5 minutes of their time. And actually, you're not even asking that. I'm asking them to visit the Halo Network website and flood the nominations for a fellow meat sack in need. I've tried, but understandably, I can't nominate myself for help. While I feel I'm taking advantage by writing to ask for help, I don't have immediate resources to help get started with the work before it becomes unbearable. This community rallies for strangers. I'm praying for a Hail Mary. I try to handle my own, make my way, but lately I've been struggling to catch up, and I already owe the world and more to the only friend I have. It would mean so much to me to have the confidence to smile and eat a steak. I can only hope that this email finds you and the hearts of the amazing meat sacks out there. Suck hard, hail Nimrod, 3 out of 5 stars, never change a thing. P.S. Sorry if the pics are disturbing. It's not easy to take a pic of the inside of your mouth. Loyal forever, Cody Allen from Bridgeport, Pennsylvania. Born February 2nd, 1989. You'll understand why I'm saying that in a second here, anybody listening. And then he left halodentalnetwork.org/nominate/ hashtag nominate. Well, Cody, I actually remember, as I said, that weekend in Denver. It's been quite a while now, but that's when after doing stand-up for so fucking long, for over 17 years, fans finally started to actually really turn up. It was a special weekend. I'm so glad you liked it. Sorry you're in pain. My God, you just want to eat a steak. Good on you for sending in this message. I love the Halo Dental Network. I think we're going to donate to them again. They're a fantastic group. I went to the link to halodentalnetwork.org. Cody, I submitted a nomination for you myself right before I recorded this episode, and I wrote the info anybody listening needs to nominate you in this episode description. Your name, city and state, your birthday, plus the link. It is all in the episode description. I'm leaving most of the regular things out of the description to not distract from it. So please, anybody listening, it won't take you 5 minutes. It'll take about 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes to quickly fill it out. It's just a few things, a few sentences on like why he should get this, why he deserves it, because he's a fucking cool dude, part of this community. His molars are broken off. He can't, fucking eat a steak. He's in constant pain. So hail Nimrod, please let us know if they pick you, Cody. Here come the teeth, motherfuckers.
Next time, suckers. I needed that.
We all did.
I don't know why I added plural. I'm upset with myself for saying motherfuckers instead of singular. That's how my brain works. There's not multiple Codys. Thanks for listening to another Bad Magic Productions podcast. Be sure and rate and review Timesuck if you haven't already, but more importantly, fill out that form for Cody. Way more importantly. Maybe don't start a cult this week by proclaiming yourself God, recruiting gullible psychiatrists who help you dose spiritual seekers with LSD so you can convince them you're new Jesus. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Doing that probably would be pretty fun in some moments. But also, it's fucked up. So just fantasize about doing that instead. And keep on sucking.
Bad Magic Productions.
Does it hurt you that she has tried to take her own life because of the way she was brought up?
Of course it does. It's not the way she was brought up, it's the way it handled, the way it went out. We didn't have everything that we needed. We had most things. I bought the bigger house because of the likes of little Sarah.
You thought a house would make everything right?
Well, I just thought it would give them more room.
People don't try and take their life because their house is too small.
You're not smart enough.
For what?
In your heart. What's in your heart is not the same.
Well, I don't know what you mean by that.
No, of course you don't.
They're saying that they were systematically...
It kills me every time.